Chapter 201. Following that, the man in white no longer placed single bets but blended into the crowd and switched to betting on big or small. However, he won every single one of his 4 bets. His initial 500 taels turned into 4,000 taels. All the generals were veterans in the casino. How could they not know that this person was truly an expert in gambling? At least, he was highly accomplished in listening to the dice. They all hoped that he would keep up the good work and win a few more bets. Many of them were secretly delighted that they had seen through this person's prowess earlier. They had followed the crowd and won a lot just now. The opportunity to make a fortune had fallen from the sky. Once the man in white's valiant achievement was announced, the generals from the other tables came as well. They swarmed over like sharks that had smelled fresh blood. Just as everyone was staring at the man in white, waiting for him to place his bets so that they could follow the crowd and make a fortune, the man in white casually kept the banknotes and returned to his spectator mode. A Dongxian general beside the man in white could not help urging him when he saw that the man in white was not placing his bets. "Brother, place your bets quickly. We're all waiting for you." The man in white's gaze froze, but he did not reply. It was as if he really had no intention of placing his bets, completely ignoring the attention around him. As far as the man in white was concerned, he already had 4,000 taels of silver. He only needed to observe for a while longer, concentrate his energy, listen out the exact numbers, and place a single bet. Then, he would be able to obtain 40,000 taels of silver. With this 40,000 taels, it would be enough for his expenses for the time being. One should not be too greedy. In any case, with the existence of this casino, he could always come back if he ran out of money. The situation today was very strange. The men around him were all tall and sturdy, and they all had a boundless murderous aura around them. He was afraid that they were all from the military and were definitely not ordinary people. If he really got entangled by this group of people, although he was not afraid, it would still be troublesome. The man in white's gaze was focused. Almost no one noticed that his ears were trembling slightly. Xiao Yunsan, who had lost 4 rounds in a row, held the dice cup in his hand and spun it up and down, left and right. Suddenly, the dice cup flew into the air and slapped the table in a practiced manner as he guffawed. "Place your bets, place your bets. Don't you dare to place your bets now that there's no beacon. Place your order. Ka 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 ka." Seeing that the man in white really did not place his bets, and hearing Xiao Yunsan's clamor, the generals could not help but squeal as they waved their banknotes and slammed them on the table. The man in white hesitated for a moment, then pushed all the silver notes in his hand into an empty space. It was a single bet again. But this time, everyone's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They looked at the man in white as if they were looking at an immortal. Because the white-robed man's single bet this time was shockingly 18 points. This white-clothed man was actually suppressing the ancestor of 6666, leopard. The ancestor of 18 points, the leopard, was a single bet, but it was different from the usual points. It was a unique point and the probability of it appearing was less than 1 in a million. Therefore, the odds of a single bet had to be multiplied by 10. In other words, once the bet was made, the odds would be 100 times. If the leopard really appeared this time, Xiao Yunsan would have to pay 400,000 taels just for the man in white alone. It was such a huge bet. The man in white felt extremely helpless about this. In all honesty, he only wanted to win 40,000 taels. However, he had clearly heard that this Xiao Yunsan fellow had pulled out all the tricks in this round. He had really shaken out a leopard. Since the other party had gotten it and he had heard it too, then, it was obvious that 400,000 taels had been delivered to him. How could he not accept it? The corner of Xiao Yunsan's mouth twitched. Is this really boss's friend? This friend is a little ruthless. Reaching out to flip the dice cup, his palm was actually trembling. Finally, with a roar, he lifted the dice cup. If I lose, I lose. It's Chiu Yunsan's virtue to admit defeat when I'm willing to bet. The dice cup was lifted. Everyone looked down and saw 3 dice lying quietly on the ground. One was 6 points, another was 6 points, and the last one was 5 points. 17 points. Wrong bet. The other generals were more concerned about winning or losing. After a momentary pause, they started making a ruckus again. F***ck. I lost again. I've won. I've won this round, haha. The man in white's gaze froze, staring at the shining 17 points on the table. He did not move his gaze away for a long time. What was going on? Chiu Yunsan was definitely not playing any tricks. This was something he could be absolutely sure of. Before the dice were revealed, the number below was definitely 18 points. However, why was it 17 points after the dice were revealed? Outside the crowd, Shui Wuyin wore a faint smile as he left, checking the tables one by one. The man in white looked at the 17 points on the table quietly, watching Chiu Yunsan laugh as he swept away the banknotes. Then, he turned and left without any expression. Yun Yang was already at the door. He had even taken an armchair and was sitting comfortably with his legs crossed, swaying from side to side. Seeing the man in white walking over, he asked in surprise, "What? Not playing anymore? Not going to play a few more rounds?" The man in white's expression was ugly. With a snort, he walked out. Yun Yang chuckled. Lost? Lost everything? This fellow was annoying. The man in white frowned. He almost could not suppress his anger. If it had only been the 50 taels from the start, it would have been fine if he had lost. However, after some twists and turns, it had reached 4,000 taels. That was a huge sum of money. It was all gone in one go. He had lost 4,000 taels of silver, not 50. Looking at the man in white's gloomy expression, Yun Yang chuckled inwardly. This was Shui Wuyin's tactic. He would let you win first, win to a certain extent, then let you lose everything in one go. The agony would be pushed to the extreme. His boss had said that losing 50 taels was too little. Then he would let him win more first and clean it all up in one go. It's only 50 silver taels. So be it if you've lost. It's not worth it. Yun Yang smiled amicably. You're welcome to come again. The man in white snorted, wanting to ignore him and walk out. However, he could not help retorting, I've lost 4,000 taels. Yun Yang chuckled. How could there be 4,000 taels? You admitted that you only had 50 taels then. Even if you've won 4,000 taels in the process, the 3,950 taels are only chips. They don't truly belong to you. It's good that you didn't lose the bet, but a bet is a bet. What you took away in the end is yours. What you brought in the beginning is also the one that lost. The man in white's face turned green, but he was speechless. Leaving after losing? What a good gambler. Still, you can't help feeling a little disappointed. Sigh, 50 shiny taels of silver are gone just like that. Sigh, 50 taels of silver as a base, and all the way up to 4,000 taels of silver. Just like that, I can imagine how upset I feel. Sigh, there's nothing I can do about it. Who doesn't want to win when they're here to gamble? Let it go, this is life, life. Yun Yang comforted the man in white incessantly, but the man's expression grew darker the more he listened. Finally, he stopped and turned to look at Yun Yang, saying in a low voice, "Shut up." Yun Yang's eyes widened. What? I say, didn't you just lose 50 silver taels? Do you have to be so anxious? I tried to comfort you out of goodwill, but you're still throwing a tantrum at me. My goodwill has gone to waste. That's the last 50 silver taels I have with me. The man in white said in a low voice, I don't wish for anyone to use this against me. The last 50 silver taels, Yun-yang nodded. This is indeed worthy of sympathy. Still, are you leaving just like that? Do you need me to lend you some silver taels? To recoup your losses? The man in white's eyes shone. You can lend it to me? Yun-yang said, helping others is helping yourself. But you must have something as collateral. Of course, I'll need to pay interest when I borrow silver taels. The man in white took out a jade pendant. How about this? Sure. Yun-yang took it and studied it carefully, weighing it in his hand. He said in a low voice, I don't know the value of this jade pendant, but it's not a problem to pawn it for 3,000 silver taels. 3,000 silver taels. The man in white sucked in a deep breath. This is the heart of the sea jade. Yun-yang rolled his eyes. Just tell me if you can lend it to me or not. Yes. The man in white swallowed his anger, almost suffocating to death. However, he had no silver taels on him and had lost his last 50 silver taels. If he really did not lend it to him, what should he do next? Did he really have to steal, rob, or do something so despicable? With these 3,000 silver taels, there was at least a chance to recoup his losses. So what if the interest was high? Who did not know that borrowing money from a casino had a high interest rate? But that was for ordinary people. Did he think that he was a fool who did not know how to gamble? Taking the 3,000 silver taels, the man in white snorted and glanced at Yun-yang from the corner of his eyes. You're not allowed to leave. I've remembered you. Once I win, I'll redeem this jade pendant immediately. That's not a problem at all. Yun-yang was beaming. I wish you victory and a killing spree here and now. Right, there's one more thing I need to make clear. If you return me 3,000 silver taels within an hour, the jade pendant will still be yours. However, if it's past an hour, you'll need 3,500 silver taels to clear your debt. What a scoundrel. He dared to ask for 1/6 of the mother gold's interest within an hour. How could this be considered a loan shark? This was robbery. No, it was even more vicious than robbery. The man in white snorted and walked in. He didn't even try to bargain. Obviously, he was very confident in himself. Half a quarter of an hour later. The man in white walked to Yun-yang with exasperation. The veins on his face were bulging and his temples were throbbing. You've recouped your losses so quickly. Brother, you're in luck this time. Yun-yang asked despite knowing the answer. The man in white was already in a bad mood. Hearing Yun-yang's words, his expression darkened. Have you lost? Yun-yang looked at the man in white in shock and disbelief, saying, how did you lose so quickly? It's only been half a quarter of an hour. We agreed on an hour just now. You don't have to be so anxious. Chapter 202. What good stuff do you have? Take it out for a look? As long as I like it, it's not a problem to pawn it, Yun-yang said. A quarter of an hour later. The man in white's expression darkened. I still have a piece of stellar steel here. 10,000 silver taels should be no problem, right? No problem. An hour later. The man in white stood in front of Yun-yang, gritting his teeth. I'm not gambling anymore. What the F***ck? That's more than 30,000 silver taels. Boss, you've lost it all in less than 2 hours. I finally know why you lost 4,000 silver taels in one go. Yun-yang shook his head and sighed, speaking earnestly, I advise you not to gamble anymore. You're too focused on your gains and losses. You're not suited for gambling at all. A small gamble is good for the mood, but a large one is harmful to the body. The man in white kept quiet, the muscles on his cheeks twitching. Farewell. He walked out step by step, each step seeming to carry the weight of 1,000 caddies. I say, if you're still unwilling to give up, I can pawn your sword as well. Yun-yang sighed slowly. Still, you should leave. You want my sword? The man in white's right hand gripped the hilt, veins popping out. How is that what I want? It's not that I'm giving you another chance to win back your losses because you're unwilling to accept your loss. Forget it, forget it. You'd better leave quickly. Yun-yang shook his head. I don't want to hurt you. The man in white had already made up his mind, striding back. I'll pawn it to you. Yun-yang's eyes widened. Brother, I was only joking with you just now. It's my fault for finding something to say. If you lose, this sword of yours will really be gone. I know what a martial artist's accompanying sword represents. Listen to my advice, don't gamble anymore. Gambling is like a pit, it's easy to get in, but it's not so easy to climb out. The man in white said coldly, say no more. I'm only asking you, do you accept it or not? Yun-yang replied, of course I do. Brother, your sword looks extraordinary. I'm willing to pay 20,000 silver taels as a pawn. I can redeem it any time. What do you think? The white-robed man's face turned green. What did you say? This sword of mine can't be bought even with 100,000 profound stones, and you're giving me 20,000 taels of silver as collateral? Yun-yang pursed his lips and said, your sword is worth 100,000 mystical stones just because you say it's worth 100,000 mystical stones? Even if he sold the entire casino, it would probably be around this amount, right? You think a sword is worth it? Why don't you just rob someone? You're the one who needs my help right now, okay? Let alone 20,000, even if it's, alright. Yun-yang said helplessly, how about this? Your luck, really. Why don't you take these 20,000 silver taels and leave? Come back tomorrow to try your luck? It looks like it's not a good time to gamble today, there's no hope for you to recoup your losses. The white-robed man was taken aback. Come back tomorrow? Come back tomorrow? Suddenly, the white-robed man looked at the gambling tables that were in the midst of a racket and a sense of fear rose within him out of nowhere. He felt that these gambling tables were like a giant mouth. Once he got close, it would swallow him whole, skin and bones. The white-robed man clutched the 20,000 silver taels in his hand, only feeling bitterness in his mouth. At this moment, he hated King Qingguang to the core. He had never hated this fellow as much as he did now. He was living a good life, roaming the world and laughing proudly in the martial world. Who could do anything to him? Yet this bastard had accepted someone's commission and started to hunt him down. He had run 30,000 miles, chasing him all the way. He had chased him from Yutong's border to Dayuan, then from Dayuan to the grassland. Yet, he did not stop, chasing him all the way to Tiantang City. He had finally managed to shake off his pursuer for the time being, but he had realized miserably that he was only left with 50 silver taels out of the hundreds of thousands of silver taels he had brought with him to buy medicine, pills, information, and treatment. He had come here to try his luck, to ease the pressure on his silver taels, but more importantly, he wanted to use the pleasure of winning to dispel the frustration he had been feeling all this while. How could he have any more expectations for a gamble like this that had already been decided? How could he have known that the outcome of this gamble was not within his expectations? The result of this gamble was only to pile up his debt. How could the white-robed man not blame First Court King Qingguang? If you hadn't chased me, would I have come here? If you hadn't chased me, would I have run out of money? If you hadn't chased me, would I have been forced to gamble? If you hadn't chased me, would I have ended up like this? Even my sword has become someone else's. And I'm in a huge debt. A debt that I might not be able to clear in my entire life. First Court King Qingguang. You and I are irreconcilable. Absolutely irreconcilable. The white-clothed man gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. Looking at the white-robed man walking out with a pale face, Yun-yang called out to him, "Brother. The white-robed man turned to see Yun Yang's sincere smile. Is there anything else? Yun Yang held up his sword with both hands. I'll lend this sword to you for now. It's necessary for a cultivator to have a sword by his side. It'll be a pity if I don't have a suitable weapon. I was only joking with you earlier. The white-robed man felt a sudden surge of emotion. He was touched. Why? His gaze towards Yun Yang was filled with longing, but he did not extend his hand to take the sword, even though his gaze was already brimming with longing. Only with one's weapon is a martial artist's life. Yun Yang said faintly, you've borrowed money from me and lost it to my casino. From a certain perspective, I don't have any losses. I won't use your sword anyway. No matter how valuable your sword is, it won't be reflected in my hands. Let's just treat it as making a friend. Since you're short of silver coins, I'll sponsor you. Consider it a form of goodwill. We're all martial artists. Who knows who'll need who in the future? Yun Yang said warmly, who knows, I might need your help in the future. Take it. The white-robed man looked at him meaningfully and said, if so, thank you. He received his sword rather excitedly and said, young master, I owe you a favor today. If there's a chance in the future, I can promise you to do something for you. He said seriously, this is my promise. When he said this, his heart was filled with gratitude. Do something for me? Yun Yang smiled. What is it? The white-robed man said seriously, it can be anything. Yun Yang clapped his hands and said, anything? That's great. Since it can be anything, there's no need to wait for the future. I happen to need someone's help with something right now. The man in white stared at Yun Yang in bewilderment, overwhelmed by both joy and sorrow. He could vaguely feel that he had yet to jump out of a pit completely, but he had already turned around and jumped into another, bigger pit without any hesitation at all. However, words were spoken. He could not go back on his word at this juncture. The white-robed man gripped his sword tightly, actually feeling that the treasured sword that had followed him for so many years was burning his hand. He asked with a dark expression, what is it? You weren't just going to talk about it just now, were you? All right, I won't ask for your help for free. As long as you're done with this, not only your sword, but all the debts here will all be written off. Begging for monthly votes. Brothers and sisters, for my sake, give me a few monthly votes. Chapter 203. Yun Yang smiled warmly. Actually, I believe it's not difficult for you to help me with this matter. Other than that, I can help you with other matters as well. Come find me when you're done and we'll discuss it in detail. I don't need your help with anything else. The man in white was almost grinding his teeth. From the moment the matter is settled, we'll be strangers. We'll go our separate ways and mind our own business. We'll have nothing to do with each other. It's a promise. A promise is a promise. Speak. It's actually very simple. You just need to do this and that. After the white-clothed man heard this, a surprised look appeared in his eyes, but your ultimate goal is only that. How precious is my promise? You're only asking me to kill one person. Yun Yang smiled warmly. You heard right. This was not going to be an easy task. Of course, that's for me. The man in white wore a disdainful expression. What's so difficult about killing one person? I still have to remind you. If you expose me in the process of doing this, then this matter won't be settled. Yun Yang reminded him kindly, this is a friendly reminder. No matter when or what the situation is, as long as you're exposed, your debt, whether it's this sword or these items, will still be mine. The man in white could only feel his anger rising. It's only natural. Yun Yang took out the jade pendants and various medals and placed them on the table. Please, just as he uttered the word please, Yun Yang stopped abruptly. Although these jade pendants and strange metals still looked the same, Yun Yang could clearly feel that at least 95% of the spiritual qi contained within them had disappeared. Yun Yang felt his teeth clench. He had only kept them in his embrace for such a short period of time and they had already been eaten by Emmy. However, the man in white was obviously enraged. Without even looking at them, he swept all the items into his embrace and said, "We don't owe each other anything from now on. Farewell." Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief. "Whatever you say. We don't owe each other anything. Remember what you've said." The man in white said angrily, "How can I, Bai Shue, be someone who goes back on my word?" Before he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yun Yang heaved a long sigh of relief. My God, that was close. According to Yun Yang's judgment, the level of this man in white was at least higher than the Dragon of Clouds, Liang Yunqi, whom he had met a few days ago. If this man was enraged and confronted him directly, he would be in deep trouble. Emmy. Emmy. Yun Yang entered the deific consciousness space with a dark expression. You, Ayaya. Emmy obviously knew that it had gotten into trouble. Its tender tendrils coiled around Yun Yang, acting coquettishly. The tip of the tendrils coiled around Yun Yang's body to please him and actually burrowed into Yun Yang's armpit. It was like a little daughter who knew that she had done something wrong and was trying her best to please her father, acting coquettishly, and being obedient. All in all, it was using all sorts of methods to get into the fray. I've lost to you. Yun Yang felt a wave of numbness, the anger within him drifting away as he warned weakly, don't do this anymore in the future, understand? Be good. Ayaya. Emmy waved its tendrils and rubbed them against Yun Yang's body and face intimately. Emmy, how many more do I need before I can advance another level? Ayaya, dozens of people? So few? Ayaya. Yun Yang could only feel himself exiting the space filled with tenderness, a smile on his face and a sense of relief. It was then that he realized that he, who had been filled with rage earlier, did not even have the chance to unleash it. Emmy's extinguishing method was indeed superb. Now that the incident caused by the man in white had come to an end, Yun Yang naturally shifted his attention back to the gambling table. Compared to the sudden appearance of the man in white, the generals of various countries were the real target today. However, Yun Yang was no longer interested in the wager here. No, perhaps it should be said that Yun Yang had never thought much of the chips and banknotes that the generals of various countries possessed. They were all prey that had entered his pocket, it was just a matter of time before they were hunted down. After a while, a certain someone shot Shui Wuyin a meaningful glance. Shui Wuyin nodded slightly without batting an eyelid. Then, the gambling skills and character of the four noble young masters exploded at the same time, as if they had been meticulously calculated. Basically, they won more than they lost at every wager. Large amounts of silver coins flowed into their pockets like the tide, leaving the generals of various countries wailing and complaining incessantly. Now do you know how powerful I am? This brother is just that amazing. Dong Tianling had long forgotten himself as he won consecutively. Brats, remember this, all of you. From now on, this brother is the top gambling god of Tianxian continent. Don't call me Dong Tianling or Young Master Dong anymore. Please call me by my nickname, Dong Lianing. Who the F***ck are you calling a brat? The generals of the military were initially enraged by their losses, their pockets dry as if they had encountered a drought. Now that they heard such an indiscriminate barrage of insults, it was like 10 years of drought encountering hailstones. How could they hold themselves back now? They immediately retorted. Dong Tianling chuckled. Whoever retorts is a brat. So many people have a reaction? That makes it even simpler. Everyone here is a brat, a piece of trash. Beat this bastard up. The crowd who had lost were enraged as they swarmed forward to attack. The four noble young masters did not show any signs of weakness as they went up to meet them. Come on, come on, the fight was so intense that the sun and moon seemed to have lost their shine. While the four noble young masters were all bruised and swollen, the generals of various countries were also in a mess. Everyone knew that this was a battle between gamblers. No one really wanted to kill each other. After all, they knew each other's background. If they really hurt each other, there would be a lot of trouble in the future. Therefore, everyone was more restrained in their attacks, very, very restrained. However, no matter how restrained they were, the towering Wind Pavilion's casino was already in ruins. Even if everyone did not unleash their true strength, the repercussions were enough to destroy the casino, leaving it no longer in its original state. The result was not too surprising, but what happened next was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps, it should be said that what happened next had everyone dumbfounded. With a loud bang, a group of people rushed into the casino, the swords and spears in their hands glinted coldly as they exuded a murderous aura. Don't move. It was the city guards. Shui Wuyin broke out in a cold sweat. We're just joking with our own people here. It's fine, however, this group of city guards refused to listen to his explanation and directly ordered, tie up everyone and bring them back for interrogation. While the generals were still in a state of shock, the city guards had already charged forward like a pack of wolves. With a dozen of them against one, the other party had to be cautious and did not dare to go all out. Naturally, the situation was one-sided. Very soon, all the troublemakers, including the four noble young masters and the generals from various countries, were tied up like rice dumplings and escorted out in a grandiose manner. Where's Yun Yang? Where's young Master Yun? The generals who were escorted out had only just regained their senses, but great young Master Yun, who had been at the door just a moment ago, was long gone. Yun Yang sprinted all the way back to the tower to heaven in one breath. He pushed the door open with a loud bang, scaring the old generals who were discussing inside. What happened? This is bad. No. This is bad. Yun Yang was panting heavily as he said breathlessly, a few generals gambled in the casino and got into a fight because they lost too much. The commotion was too big, so the city guards were dispatched and captured all of them. Silence. There was a deathly silence. Everyone's eyeballs were almost popping out of their sockets as they looked at Yun Yang, digesting the earth-shattering news that Yun Yang had brought. No one dared to believe the description that their ears had just heard. So many people have been captured by the city guards? The empire of Zio's old marshal's beard was trembling. Since when did the city guards start to care about such trivial matters? Yun Yang patted his buttocks anxiously. Everyone, please think of something quickly. Save them. This is terrible. Amidst the shock, Han Sanha regained his composure and looked at Yun Yang with a smile. Young Master Yun, you brought them out and watched them be captured? Is this how you treat your guests? Or perhaps this is how the Empire of Yutong treats its guests? Yun Yang cried out, feeling wronged. Old Marshal Han, can you not simply accuse others? What does this have to do with me? The cause of this is them causing trouble, all right? It's only right for the city guards to capture people. Not to mention the fact that I don't have an official position, even if I'm a popinjay, even if I were a high official in the imperial court, I can't bury my conscience and forcefully stop others from enforcing the law, can I? His words were beautifully spoken, open and righteous. Not only did he keep himself out of the matter perfectly, he did not forget to elevate himself and show off the righteousness of Yutong's officials at the same time. This was, simply, F***ck, this fellow is being treated the same way as everyone else, he's saying everything he wants. The old generals and soldiers cursed in their hearts. This bastard. When nothing happened, he patted his chest as if he was the most capable person in the world and could do anything. As long as he was around, nothing would happen. But once something happened, he would say, I'm just a foppish young master, pushing everything aside, nothing would work. F***CKU. Everyone knew that the root cause of this incident was definitely Yun Yang's doing. Only this immoral fellow could have done something like this. To actually invite someone to prison, there was really no one who could do such a thing. Chapter 204. The youth's eyes glowed brilliantly as he looked at Yun Yang and said faintly, Young Master Yun's tactics are impressive indeed. However, young Master Yun should ask yourself, do you really dare to kill these people? Yun Yang slammed the table upon hearing the youth's words and roared in anger, how can you say that? What do you mean by my tactics? I've worked so hard to bring them out to play. Am I not to be blamed for it? The situation now is that they've lost money and started fighting, causing the current situation. Am I to be blamed for this? The youth in black said coldly, Young Master Yun knows better than anyone else what is going on. I only have one question. Young Master Yun, you've toyed with these people like this, but do you really dare to kill them? Yun Yang said angrily, do you think I don't dare? If you dare to say another word. Just one word. Let me hear it. King Hell, if your father can't kill them on the battlefield, can't I kill them in prison? Try saying another word. Let's see if this young master dares to kill a few of them. Yun Yang slammed the table. Isn't it just a war? A war? When has the Empire of Yutong not been at war all these years? Who the F***ck are you trying to scare? The youth in black sucked in a deep breath and clenched his teeth, not daring to say another word. Yun Yang, who had gained the upper hand, did not give up. He kicked the table in front of him away and said angrily, King Hell, your father was sent out to be a tour guide and I didn't get paid a single cent. How could I be bullied like this? It was your own people who lost money and caused trouble by fighting ungracefully. Your father ran all the way back to deliver the message, but someone actually doubts me. God, open your eyes and see, is there still justice in this world? Justice doesn't lie in the hearts of men, right and wrong can only be determined by others. Han Sanha closed his eyes as his head throbbed. His initially calm expression was nowhere to be seen. He was now certain of one thing, if the generals from various countries continued to stay here, it would not be surprising for a few of them to die if they were targeted by Yun Yang, the bastard. It was better to leave quickly. If the plan was to be abandoned, then so be it. He could not King afford to offend this person. Forget it. I'll think of something myself, Han Sanha said with a frown. After a brief discussion with the old marshals, they walked towards Qiu Jinhan's residence in unison. This time, he was truly helpless and could only lower his head to that old bastard. They had no choice but to lower their heads. If two of those people who were caught died in there, it would be a big problem. The few of them sighed as they walked. Yun Yang continued to lecture the rest of the people, tell me, are you being reasonable? Are you being reasonable? Ah. I'm really King a dog. Why do the generals of your countries all have this kind of quality? What kind of quality was this? CK me. Did you guys come here to ruin Yutong's culture? Poor me, who is as pure as a little white flower. I've only been with you for a few days, but I've already become so vulgar. Is there any way to do this job? Was this Yutong, Dongxian, Tianxi, Dayuan, or Zio? How lawless, all of you going against your conscience and distorting the truth, calling a deer a horse. God, I feel so miserable, so tired. The generals were exasperated as they looked at the man who seemed to be in a frenzy. This fellow was obviously in character. If your acting was so good, why don't you go be a movie king? Yet, no one dared to speak up. After the previous bloody lessons, the generals were well aware of Yun Yang's crazed personality. The more they argued, the more spirited they became. Instead, they ignored him and slowly, they gave up. My head hurts. I'm going back to my room to rest for a while. My head hurts too, my stomach hurts. I suddenly remembered something. What is it? I'm going back to my room to think. The dozens of generals stood up as if there was no one else around, rolling their eyes and walking away. They did not even spare Yun Yang a glance. Behind them, Yun Yang's incessant grumbling could still be heard. What kind of people are these? What kind of quality is this? You guys beat someone up after losing a gamble and even got caught. Such an embarrassing thing. You guys can really do it. I'm impressed. What kind of shame is this? What kind of quality is this? Bang! The generals slammed the doors shut, blocking out the demonic voice outside. All of them held their heads in their hands and sighed deeply. Each of them felt as if 10,000 mythical beasts were galloping through their knee-deep fecal soup after the heavy rain. All of them could not help but curse, this bastard. As for who they were cursing, it was a matter of opinion. On the same night, Yun Yang turned into a gust of wind and entered the prison quietly. This was the reason why he had captured these people. Yun Yang walked around the cell soundlessly. When he walked out, he heaved a deep sigh. He shook his head. It was not enough. Besides, there was another use for it. Why didn't that fellow give him a few more hits? The next morning, Han Sanha and the others brought the captured generals out of the yamen. However, each and every one of them was covered in dirt and grime, their heads hung low in dejection. The few old marshals had beaten and scolded them, teaching them a lesson. Then, they discussed amongst themselves. If this went on, a few of them might really die. Forget it, let's leave. Hence, on this day, the people from Zhou, Dayuan, and Tianxi bade Yun Yang farewell without hesitation. Although they did not want to see this bastard, the blood of the hero was still on him. Yun Yang nodded vigorously and patted his chest. Leave it to me. When the generals left, Yun Yang collected the money for 50,000 pots of wine. Then, each country was given 10,000 pots. Before the empire of Zhou's Marshal Zi left, Yun Yang had a secret conversation with him. When he returned, he was holding something in his hand and stuffed it into his robe. No one knew what kind of deal had been made. When the soldiers of the various countries walked out of the city gates, they were met with thousands of disdainful gazes. All kinds of whispers filled his ears. See that? This is Dayuan. Pfft. I heard that they're either lechers or gambling addicts. I heard. They're not here to celebrate Marshal Iron's wedding, but for the prostitutes. Not exactly, but not far from it. If they're not here for the ladies, then they're here to play with money. There's not even 1 in a million who's here to congratulate them sincerely. I also heard that they've been arrested after losing a bet and fighting. Why are the people over there like this? Lechers, gambling, and even taking their winnings. It's disgusting. How can people like this be generals? This is probably what they mean when they say they pick out a general from a pot. It's really destroying my worldview. Look at those people, they're all lethargic. I guess they're anxious because they didn't manage to play with the ladies. F***ck. Damn it. That's right, damn it. Get out of here. Don't ever come again. Beat them to death if they dare come again. Yes, beat them to death. The generals of the various countries walked out of the city gates with their heads hung low, too ashamed to face anyone. There was no way they could explain themselves to these people. Therefore, the journey back home could really be described as covering one's head and scurrying away like a rat. The generals of the various countries left in unison. Other than Han Sanha, all of Dongxuan's generals were sent back by Han Sanha as well. They had no choice but to go back. The tour guide they had found here was too formidable. They could not hold him back. Only Han Sanha was still there, lingering in Tiantang City. Now, only Han Sanha, the youth dressed in black, and the 8 guards were left in Tiantang City from other countries. Yun Yang mumbled to himself. He knew that Han Sanhe must have stayed behind for another reason, but he only knew the way but did not know the reason. No matter how skilled Yun Yang was, he could still guess what Han Sanhe's real intention was without any clues or evidence. However, more than 95% of the foreign generals had left. Young Master Yun, the only official tour guide, had naturally lost his purpose of existence. He had retired and gone home to count his silver taels. During the time he was entertaining the foreign generals, Yun Yang had leaped from a destitute man to one of the wealthiest people in Tiantang City. With more than 200 million taels of silver in his hands, he could not help but feel high-spirited and proud. With a certain someone's speed of getting rich, it was undeniable that no one would be able to do it in the future, but it was undeniable that it was unprecedented. Yun Yang smiled faintly and tossed it to Emmy, taking out a piece of translucent, amethyst jade from his embrace. This was the reward that Yun Yang had asked for from the empire of Zio's Marshal Z before he left. The matter was simple. Marshal Z was of royal blood, his words held more weight than the marshals of other countries. Other than the first batch of 50,000 pots of the blood of the hero, he had also ordered the subsequent batches. This piece of jade was Yun Yang's deposit and also a thank-you gift. Looking at the departing generals, Yun Yang's gaze was dark, but there was a glint of murderous intent flashing across his eyes. "It's up to you all when you realize it." Yun Yang mumbled to himself coldly. "After all, I am from Yutong." Chapter 205. At the inn. An invitation was presented solemnly. Han Sanhe had been invited by old Marshal Qiu for a long talk. Yesterday, Han Sanhe had come with a group of old marshals to plead for the old marshal to release those people. Due to the circumstances, Han Sanhe had lowered his status, allowing old Marshal Qiu to hold his head high. Even now, he was still reminiscing about it, feeling a little unsatisfied. Therefore, the old marshal had invited Han Sanhe over to reminisce early in the morning, hoping to rekindle the past and renew their relationship. Reminisce? Old Marshal Qiu's chuckle was full of glee, not bothering to hide it. It was a prelude. Han Sanhe's brows did not waver, his expression unchanging as he said faintly, "It's been so many years, indeed, it's time to reminisce." Old Marshal Qiu chuckled and said, "Those people you came to beg me to release yesterday, have they all left the city today?" Han Sanhe's face twitched subconsciously. "You came to beg me yesterday." Han Sanhe sat up straight again and said seriously, "This old man has a vulgar word to say to you, shameless old man." "I wonder if I should say it?" Old Marshal Qiu coughed and said, "Since it's a vulgar word, it's better not to say it." Han Sanhe snorted. After a while, old Marshal Qiu scratched his ears and cheeks for a good while before he could not help but ask, "I say, Han Sanhe, you've helped those people so much. Didn't they thank you?" Han Sanhe's face was as red as a date, but he remained silent. "No matter what, they should have given you some gifts, shouldn't they?" The old marshal's thirst for knowledge was strong. "Tell me, how did they thank you specifically? How many gifts did you receive? Old Hua, you're rich this time. Although they've lowered themselves to beg me once, it's still worth it." Han Sanhe stood up and left with a flick of his sleeves. He didn't even say a word of farewell. In the face of such a shameless old thing, whose skin could be taken off and used as a shoe pad, and who specialized in exposing people's scars and taking pleasure in doing so, it was really a waste of breath to not speak a single word. Qiu Jianhan looked at Han Sanhe's receding silhouette and called out loudly, "Old Han, if there's anything you need help with in the future, just let me know. As long as it's within my means, this old man won't refuse or say anything else. Actually, there's nothing we can talk about between us. Don't say anything about begging or not, that's what's really disappointing." Han Sanhe's footsteps hastened, as if he could not hear anything and could not hear anything as he hurried away. The old marshal's maniacal laughter could still be heard from behind, his laughter unbridled and overjoyed. "Old fool! How dare you bully me like this?" Exiting Marshal Chio's residence, Han Sanha's face was already ashen, his heart filled with resentment. This old bastard said early in the morning that he had something important to discuss with him and tricked him to come here. In the end, he came here to let this old bastard have a good time. After this, he did have a good time, but he was injured, and his internal organs felt like they were burning. When we meet on the battlefield in the future, I must capture this old bastard and bring him to his death. You've gone too far. You've gone too far. Han Sanha was truly enraged now, words that should never have come out of his mouth spilling out into the world. The black-robed young man followed behind him without saying a word, following him closely. As they turned a corner, the group was suddenly stunned, coming to a halt immediately. Right in front of them, a man dressed in white was standing in the middle of the road. At this moment, everyone felt as if Mount Han's ice and snow were blowing in their faces. The man in white was wearing plain clothes that were as white as snow. His face was also as white as snow. Other than his hair and eyes which were black, the rest of his body was snow white, as if he was in mourning. It would have been fine if it was just the color of the unlucky white, but the man's age was unpredictable. It was possible to say that he was 20 years old, it was also possible to say that he was 30, it was also possible to say that he was more than 40, it was also possible to say that he was an old monster that was hundreds of years old. Not only did the unlucky white look dizzy, there was also a chilling air that was as cold as a snowy mountain. Seeing that the man's aura had been cut off, the youth in black tensed up and took a step forward, shielding Han Sanha. The four guards by Han Sanha's side looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy as well. Clang, 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 without a word, they had already gripped their weapons in their hands, mystical chi vortexes forming rapidly in the air. Han Sanha's heart skipped a beat when he saw this. He had never been known for his mystical cultivation base, his mystical chi cultivation base was limited, so he could not tell the depth of the man in white's ability. However, his four guards were mystical chi cultivators, top-notch experts. Once the man appeared, all four of them moved in unison, ready to fight. It was a clear indication of the man's strength. Furthermore, the fact that the four of them had moved first meant that they were at a disadvantage. It also meant that the four guards had no confidence in dealing with the man in white, they had to channel their chi in advance to ensure their safety. Who was this man in white? How could he have such an imposing aura? Who are you? The youth in black was alarmed, his hand already caressing the jade bangle on his left wrist. The man in white said faintly, "Marshal Han, is this how you treat your friends?" "Friends?" Han Sanha frowned and asked, "May I ask who you are?" The man in white said, "Marshal Han need not ask too much. I'm here on behalf of someone to protect you during your stay in Yutong." Han Sanha asked, "May I ask who asked you to do this?" The white-clothed man snorted and did not reply. His expression was filled with arrogance. "May I know your name?" Han Sanha asked. The man in white said coldly, "I am Bai Yishue." Once the name Bai Yishue was uttered, the youth in black and Han Sanha's four guards paled at the same time. White clothes fluttered in the air like snow. The person in front of him was the rumored assassin of the martial world, Bai Yishue. It was said that this person had once fought with Jun Moyan, the unrivaled swordsman in the world, and had lost to Jun Moyan by a single move. Although he had suffered a severe injury from Jun Moyan's sword that pierced through his chest, he had still managed to retreat in the air, causing Jun Moyan to be unable to chase after him. He had been so elegant and composed that he could be considered a legend in swordsmanship. Bai Yishue. The Nine Heavens Blizzard, the Divine Sword White Robe. He ranked 6th on the swordsman chart. Han Sanha wanted to ask further. However, Bai Yishue had already said coldly, "Marshal Han need not ask who asked me to do this. I won't tell you even if you do. You only need to know that if I were here to assassinate you, you would have become a corpse by now. There will be no luck involved. Bai Yixue was indifferent, as if he was announcing a fact. Han Sanhe chuckled humorlessly but did not speak further. What Bai Yixue said was true. If Bai Yixue had attacked secretly and wanted to kill him, the success rate would be extremely high. Even if it was not 100%, it would be 99%. Just by looking at his four guards' expressions as if they were facing a formidable enemy, he knew that Bai Yixue's words were true. Not necessarily. The youth in black said coldly, if you're really here to assassinate, it's still unknown who will die now. Bai Yixue's crystal-like eyes looked at the youth in black's face as he said faintly, perhaps I will die as well, in addition to your hidden strength, but the target I want to kill will definitely die before me. There's no guarantee. The youth in black sucked in a deep breath and did not retort. It was obvious that Bai Yixue was speaking the truth, there was no room for rebuttal. If Bai Yixue were to risk his life to kill someone, there were not many people in this world that he could not kill. Han Sanhe could not help but smile as he thought about it, if so, I shall thank Bai Hero Bai. Bai Yixue's face twitched as he said, I dare not. The title of hero. I don't deserve it. Since the beginning of time, those with the title of hero have died a more tragic death. There are only a few who have a good ending. The group was speechless. How were they supposed to continue the conversation when you spoke like this? A few words and the conversation would be over. Regardless, Dongxuan's people were still suspicious of Bai Yixue, the person before them, but they no longer suspected him of having the intention to assassinate the god of war. Han Sanhe and his entourage had their reservations, but their desire to befriend the man had also grown after the initial fear had dissipated. After all, it would be strange if they did not want to befriend such a superb expert. Bai Yixue had successfully joined Han Sanhe's team, still looking stern and unsmiling, but the rest of the group was not bothered by it. An expert had always acted independently, this was how a superb expert should be. Moreover, this was the legendary White Blade Master, Bai Yixue. It was to be expected that he would be arrogant and cold. No matter what, Han Sanhe's confidence had increased for no reason. Now that Bai Yixue was their bodyguard, whoever dared to provoke him would have to go through him first. It was truly not an easy task to get through. For the next 2 days, Bai Yixue followed Han Sanhe, paying his respects here and there, never leaving his side. He truly displayed the role of a superb expert's bodyguard. Although he did not smile, his methods were straightforward, adding a 99% sense of security to those who saw him. However, this great swordsman Bai Yixue was not in a good mood during these few days. His expression was even worse, as if everyone he looked at owed him a huge sum of money. The group only thought that it was beneath his status to be a bodyguard, but they did not think too much about it. From the afternoon of the second day onwards, Han Sanhe and the youth dressed in black brought their guards to the 1,000-feet lake. They went fishing with their fishing rods. Bai Yixue followed them as if it was only natural. A night had passed, but they had not caught a single fish. Han Sanhe was not discouraged, going back to rest for a while before going again in the afternoon. Since Han Sanhe had rested, the guards had to rest as well. 2 of them were left to guard the door while the rest went to the room next door to meditate and recover their energy. I'm going out to settle some personal matters. Bai Yixue stood up with a cold expression and spoke without thinking. No one knew who he was talking to, but he walked out without waiting for the others to speak. The long sword that he always carried with him was no longer worn on his waist but gripped in his hand. I won't wait any longer. Let's finish this quickly and leave. Once this is done, I'll never come to Tiantang City again in this lifetime. I can't even see that young Master Yun again. I don't want to die because of him. Chapter 206. Sixth among the world's swordsmen, what arrogance. Watching Bai Yixue leave, a guard muttered softly with a pout. I wonder what the first place is like. Another person rolled his eyes. Look at this person's stance, he's just like the first. Another person craned his neck. Stop talking. It's his ability to be ranked sixth. Why aren't we ranked? Another person sighed. Luckily, we're on the same side now. What's wrong with being a little more tolerant? Big brother is right. Were they really on the same side? Bai Yixue strolled out of the inn, his eyes cold as he walked. His heart was filled with resentment. This reputed one shall never gamble again for the rest of my life. Bai Yixue prayed in his heart. Many people in Tiantang City knew that Bai Yixue had been following Han Sanhe around for the past few days. This person was Han Sanhe's personal guard. Seeing him walk over in his white robe, it was as if frost was descending on everyone's heads, causing them to move out of the way as soon as possible. They could not help but look at this fellow curiously. Where was he going? Why did it look like he was walking towards the palace? However, Bai Yixue did not actually go to the palace. Instead, he walked to the front of a residence and stopped abruptly. The residence in front of Bai Yixue was not small and it looked like it was newly built. It was probably because the mud used to build the walls was not completely dry yet. This was the residence of old Sir He Hanqing. It had been some time since He Hanqing's residence had been charred by Yun Yang's fire. The construction on the surface had already been completed. It had only been 3 days since Sir He had moved back to his residence from his temporary residence to the time when he had temporarily stayed elsewhere. He had not even warmed his seat yet. Bai Yixue stood in front of the door, watching the inside coldly, not moving. The people inside were also looking curiously at this unmoving fellow who had come out of nowhere. What was wrong with this fellow? Was he mentally ill? Why is he standing in front of our house and not moving? Is he envious of this wonderful residence? Bai Yixue's right hand moved, gripping the hilt of his sword as he said faintly, I'm sorry. I have to do this because of my superior's orders. Before he finished speaking, a snow-white sword light flashed like lightning in the night sky. Shua! Old Master, he had just finished building the main gate, which had only been completed a few days ago, with a loud crash. Immediately, smoke and dust filled the sky. His white robes fluttered as Bai Yixue entered with his sword in hand. Outsiders, move aside. Today, I will only take He Hanqing's life. This was what Yun Yang wanted him to do. Yun Yang had requested to follow Han Sanhe for 6 days and ask Bai Yixue to assassinate He Hanqing after Han Sanhe had left, but Bai Yixue could not wait any longer. Hurry up and settle this matter. I'll leave immediately. From now on, I will never return to Tiantang City. Bai Yixue prayed in his heart. That bastard young Master Yun, I never want to see him ever again. Therefore, Bai Yixue had come impatiently. Moreover, he had openly and brazenly killed his way into He Hanqing's house in broad daylight. How could the people inside actually move aside? A large group of guards charged over with angry roars. Bai Yixue's expression was cold as a murderous glint flashed in his eyes. His sword light flashed rapidly, circling the entire yard like a lightning bolt. Cries of agony rang out incessantly as the guards who had charged out collapsed to the ground. Many heads rolled like watermelons. Even if there were some survivors, they had broken limbs and were missing limbs. Fresh blood flowed into a small river on the ground. He Hanqing. Bai Yixue's howl shook the 9 heavens. Come out and accept your death. Why let so many innocent people lose their lives? The only person I want to kill is yourself. A cold, hard voice that sounded like clashing metal spoke faintly, Did Han Sanhe ask you to come? Bai Yixue swung his sword in a circle, a bright radiance turning into a circle that shielded him within as he said faintly, No. I kill whoever I want. Do I need to be instructed by someone else? The person sneered, Bai Shue, no matter who asked you to come, you shall die here today. Before he finished his words, a sharp gust of wind came whistling. The shadow of a large saber flashed in midair, the saber's light stretched 100 feet long as it slashed down brilliantly. Shameless boasting. Surprise flashed in Bai Shue's eyes, but the long sword in his hand parried and pushed lightly. With a flash of his body, he had already charged over. It was a forceful attack, a preemptive strike against the enemy. Crack, 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 both of them were locked in a melee. Just as they were fighting fiercely, another person charged out from the side with a cold glint, aiming straight for Bai Shue's back. The attack came without a sound, like a phantom. It was so stealthy that one would not even know if he was dead. Unexpectedly, Bai Shue seemed to have eyes on his back. With a shake of the sword in his hand, he had already deflected the enemy's weapon behind him. Then, the sword light flashed again, enveloping the person who came after him in the sword light. The battle between two people had turned into a three-man battle. Although Bai Shue was fighting 1 against 2, he was still calm and had the upper hand. Then, another 2 cold glints came at him from the left and right. Surprise flashed in Bai Shue's eyes, but his sword light expanded once more, like a 1,000-feet waterfall pouring down, enveloping the 2 people who had just charged out within the range of his sword light. Although Bai Shue had the battle under his control once again, the surprise in his heart had grown exponentially. He Hanqing was only an old man from the Empire of Yutong. Even if he had some reputation, what did he do to have so many pinnacle experts as his guards? This seems a little strange. Had he been tricked by that young Master Yun again? It was one thing for Bai Shue to be puzzled, but he did not slack in his attacks. He was indeed worthy of the title of the world's 6th swordsman. His sword glinted with starlight, the cold glint was unstoppable as he suppressed all 4 of his opponents. They could only hold on strenuously under his sword, not losing. However, the sky was suddenly covered by darkness as a strong and heavy sound of wind breaking came crashing down. There was more. Bai Shue was truly shocked now. He finally felt that it was not that something was amiss, but that something was terribly amiss. What did that bastard ask me to do? Did I not say that I would only kill an old scholar? Why did it feel like I had poked a hornet's nest? Wasn't this place a little too dangerous? A mere old scholar could actually have the protection of 5 pinnacle experts. Even a country's monarch could not compare to such a lineup. However, no matter how surprised he was, he still had to deal with the incoming attack. Bai Shue's sword light flashed, the tip of his sword pointing directly at the incoming weapon. Puff! With a flip, Bai Shue retreated 70 feet, his face flushed. The opponent's weapon was a gigantic sledgehammer. From the looks of it, it was at least 700 or 800 kilograms in weight. He really didn't expect that the attack from the sky would be a sledgehammer. This time, he made a mistake in his prediction of the enemy and immediately suffered a great loss. His internal organs were also shaken and injured. However, the person in front of him didn't have it easy either. He grunted and coughed up a mouthful of blood. His entire body was sent flying high into the air due to the violent recoil, and the large hammer looked even more shocking to the eye. While the person wielding the hammer had successfully ambushed Bai Shue and injured him, his cultivation base was much weaker than Bai Shue's. The moment their weapons came into contact, the disparity in mystical chi levels had caused him to be severely injured as well. The severity of his injury was even more severe than Bai Shue's. Being unexpectedly injured, Bai Shue was in a hurry to recuperate and recover. He still had a strong opponent in his sights, so he dared not be injured. Unexpectedly, there was a sudden tremor from the ground. A pair of hands shot out from the ground and locked onto Bai Shue's ankles like a pair of iron pincers, twisting them forcefully. On the ground, the 5 people who had just been pushed back by Bai Yixue pounced towards him in 5 different directions, as if they did not care for their lives. Bai Yixue was shocked, but he had no choice but to give it his all when his life was at stake. "Heh!" he exclaimed in a low voice. It was as if 1,000 mountains of ice and snow had exploded at the same time as a copious amount of cold air surged into the sky. The sudden outburst was the limit of Bai Yixue's lifetime cultivation base. The person who was underneath and had restrained Bai Yixue was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. He could no longer hold on to Bai Yixue's ankles with a pained grunt, his hands were torn apart, dripping with blood. A mouthful of blood spurted up from the ground, like a fountain of blood. The 5 people who had attacked at the same time grunted at the same time, retreating involuntarily. All of them paled. Although Bai Yixue was unexpectedly injured and was restrained by the people on the ground, his actual ability was far above these 6 people. The result of his outburst was as expected, it was incredibly valiant. However, Bai Yixue was not in a good state either. His ankles were bruised, and waves of excruciating pain came from his ankles from time to time. The outburst just now had also caused the mystical qi he had used to suppress his injuries to burst as well. His internal injuries had worsened due to the strong impact. Knowing that he was severely injured, Bai Yixue spun his sword and looked around, obviously wanting to break out of the encirclement quickly and leave this strange place of trouble. Who would have thought that there would be 2 more silhouettes pouncing over fearlessly amidst the tumbling dust and smoke? There were actually 2 more. What was more infuriating was that he had not even seen the face of the old scholar called He Hanqing after fighting for his life until now. What the F***ck was going on? The ground rumbled as if it had exploded again. It was the people who had charged out from underneath. Now, there were 8 people attacking Bai Yixue at the same time. Bai Yixue fought back with his sword with all his might, trying his best to keep himself from falling. However, the 2 injuries he had sustained were more than just one injury on top of another, he was gradually losing his strength. The 8 people's weapons consisted of sabers, swords, spears, hammers, whips, staffs, short swords, and a ribbon. These 8 different weapons were of different lengths, light and heavy, hard and soft, yet they worked together seamlessly and tacitly. The longer the fight went on, the more intricate it became. Bai Yixue could not help but grumble inwardly. He had probably been tricked. Today's 4th update. Seeking monthly votes. 410,000 words on the shelves. Today is the 23rd. 23 days, 230,000 words have been updated. It's not that I'm flaunting myself, but there aren't many like me after so many years, am I right? Chapter 207. Bai Yixue could not help but feel regret. He should have been more ruthless when the battle had begun and killed 1 or 2 of them with a brutal blow. Even if they were severely injured, he would not have fallen into such a dire situation. With the 8 men's teamwork, he would have needed a long battle to kill 1 or 2 of them even if he had been in perfect condition. It would have been impossible for him to kill all 8 of them. But now the situation is completely reversed, and it's very dangerous. Of the 8 people on the other side, many of them were injured, but when they cooperated with each other, they were incomparably tight, and he couldn't find any weak link. F***ck, I've been tricked again. Bai Yixue resisted and retaliated with all his might, feeling resentful. That bastard had said it was a simple mission, but he had only asked him to kill an old scholar. This place was obviously more dangerous than any dragon's lair or tiger's den he had ever been to. It was much more dangerous. It was at this moment that an even greater sense of danger rose within him. Bai Yixue roared, his sword splitting into 8 rays of sword light to repel the 8 men at the same time. Only then did he turn to look. He saw an elder with a head full of white hair standing in the yard, looking at him with his arms behind his back. The elder exuded an aura that was as imposing as a mountain and as deep as the ocean. It was only then that Bai Yixue was truly shocked. Based on the aura alone, he could tell that the other party's cultivation base was actually higher than his own when he was at his peak. Who was this person? The elder spoke faintly. This old and useless one is he Hanqing himself. I wonder why great swordsman Bai Yixue wants to kill me. Bai Yixue's heart sank coldly. F***ck. He had been tricked. That pretty boy wasn't a good person after all. The pretty boy didn't have a good heart indeed. A transcendent expert like this, one who's beyond his own limits, with 8 powerful guards, actually wants me to assassinate him single-handedly. He was F***king asking his father to die. Now that things had come to this, he had to make a swift decision and leave immediately. Otherwise, he might really die here. Thinking about it, Bai Yixue roared. Suddenly, he spun rapidly like a spinning top. The sword light around him flickered with a cold gleam that grew more intense. At the same time, the cold wind at the peak of the snowy mountain began to howl fiercely. Bai Yixue howled, "Those who stand in my way shall die." Before his voice echoed in the air, he was already there. Bai Yixue soared into the sky like a roller, charging towards the 3 men who were standing on top of the wall. Life or death, it all depended on this. If he couldn't make it out this time, then he would really have to die here this time. The 5 people around him roared at the same time. Their sabers, spears, swords, hammers, and cudgels all smashed towards the rolling sword light. It was obviously meant to obstruct the enemy and diminish the sharpness of Bai Yixue's sword. Bai Yixue did not evade the 5 incoming attacks. He did not change his direction either, flying forward like a long dragon. All the weapons that crashed against the sword light that was the embodiment of man and sword could only cause a ripple like the surface of water. They could not stop the momentum of the attack at all. "Get out of the way, let him go," he Hanqing shouted with a frown. His actual cultivation base was higher than Bai Yixue's, so he could see clearly that Bai Yixue was risking his life. If the 3 subordinates on top of the wall were to intercept him forcefully, there was a high chance that they could stop Bai Yixue, but the 3 men would die without a doubt. In addition, they would have to bring in 2 or 3 more people who would participate in the ambush. He could not afford such a loss right now. Ever since he had been severely injured by Ling Xiaozue, he had been severely injured and could only suppress his opponents with his aura. He could not fight at all. The 3 men on top of the wall grunted and parted to the side simultaneously. However, the weapons in their hands had left their hands, thrown out in a desperate manner. They collided with the sword light that flashed by. The sword light scattered once more as Bai Yixue spat a mouthful of blood into the air. However, the sword light moved even faster, like a shooting star streaking across the sky, disappearing in a flash. In the blink of an eye, the sky returned to silence. At the very last moment, Bai Yixue turned back to look and was relieved when he saw that he Hanqing had not made a move. "As long as this old man doesn't make a move, I have an 80% higher chance of leaving this place alive today." Bai Yixue had already disappeared into the distance, his speed like a shooting star chasing after the moon. All 8 of them knew that they could not catch up to him. Besides, the others' actual cultivation base was far above any of them. Even if 1 or 2 of them managed to catch up to him, they would only end up as food for the other. There's no need to chase after him. He Hanqing sighed, his brows locked in a deep frown. Bai Yixue is already severely injured. He has obviously lost his composure by breaking out at the last moment. A guard said, "Even if he survives, I believe he won't be able to do much for the time being." But why did he come? The spearhead is directed at old he himself. The other guard looked at he Hanqing in confusion. "I heard that Bai Yixue is currently Han Sanhe's personal guard, tasked to ensure Han Sanhe's safety when he's in Yutang. He's always with Han Sanhe, but why does this guard of Han Sanhe want to assassinate you, boss?" Another guard asked. He Hanqing kept quiet for a bit and said, "Ah San, bring my name card and invite Han Sanha here for a talk." Ah San chuckled humorlessly and said, "Boss, this is a difficult matter. If Han Sanha did it, how would he dare come? If he didn't do it, he wouldn't even come." He Hanqing said faintly, "Wrong. Whether he did it or not, he will definitely come." A gloomy black air flashed in his eyes. It was an eerie murderous intent. He said faintly, "Even if this wasn't Han Sanha's doing, he must know what's going on. He needs to know. He has to know." At this moment, He Hanqing's voice was several times colder, like the gloomy cries of ghosts drifting out from hell. Han Sanha had just laid down for his afternoon nap. Before he could fall asleep, the door to the Tower to Heaven Inn was kicked open. A fearless voice hollered, "Where is the Empire of Dongxuan's Han Sanha?" Han Sanha's 8 guards stood up at the same time, following the voice. Looking at the 2 people who had entered the Tower to Heaven Inn, they were enraged. "Who are you? How dare you make such a ruckus?" The person who had just arrived had called out Marshal Han's name so boldly, he had no manners at all. The person at the door said coldly, "I'm here on old Sir He's order to invite Han Sanha and Marshal Han to the residence for a chat." As he spoke, a name card was passed over. Han Sanha was surprised to see the name card that had been sent in. He Hanqing. Why would the leader of the literati in the Empire of Yutang, the Grand Master of Confucianism of his generation, come looking for him for no reason? Besides, his attitude was impolite. Not only was this strange, but it was also strange. It was odd. No matter what, Han Sanha had to go to He Hanqing's invitation. No matter how he criticized the other party's invitation method, it was still a servant who had come to send an invitation. Just based on the fact that the other party was a master of literature and a leader of Confucianism, as well as the fact that he had taken the initiative to invite Han Sanha had no choice but to go. It would be impolite if he did not go, and it was not just Han Sanha who would be impolite, but the entire empire of Dongxian. After all, Han Sanha's official identity was the representative of the empire of Dongxuan's military. However, when Han Sanha saw He Hanqing, he immediately understood that he had made a mistake coming here. No matter how impolite it was still better than entering a dangerous place and facing danger head-on. The meeting between the 2 of them proceeded swiftly. Once the conversation started, He Hanqing went straight to the main topic. "I'm ashamed to say this, but this old man was assassinated just now. I'm sure Marshal Han doesn't know about this yet," He Hanqing said softly as he brewed tea. Han Sanha was taken aback. Assassination? Just as it happened, He Hanqing's men had already arrived at the inn. Han Sanha was in the Empire of Yutang after all, how could he be so well informed? Therefore, he definitely did not know about this news. However, why would old He ask such a question? Someone actually dared to assassinate old He, how audacious. I wonder if the assassin has been caught? Han Sanha asked, concerned. With his experience, how could he not tell that there was a deeper meaning in He Hanqing's words? He could also see that He Hanqing's expression did not seem to be in a good mood, but Han Sanha would never have thought that this matter would be related to him, not even in his wildest dreams. Caught? How could I have caught him? He Hanqing shook his head and sighed. That assassin was confident in his high cultivation base. When he came to assassinate me, he did it openly and openly. If it weren't for the few righteous men here who risked their lives to protect me, I wouldn't have been able to prevent the assassin from taking my muddle-headed head. Huh? A direct assassination? The assassin is really bold. Do you know the identity of the assassin? He should have been arrested and brought to justice. Han Sanha exclaimed. He was even more confused about He Hanqing's purpose in inviting him here. What did provoking an assassin have to do with him, a marshal of another country? Was the assassin sent by him? Arrest? It's easier said than done. This old man is a weak scholar, my knowledge of martial cultivation is shallow. I only remember that the assassin had introduced himself as Bai Shue and that this has nothing to do with anyone else. He only wants to kill me, he Han Qing. The righteous men who protected me just now said that this person is one of the top swordsmen in this world, one of the top swordsmen in the world. It was only a fluke that they could barely deal with him. He explained. His eyes that seemed to be blurry from old age were gleaming with an icy chill as he looked at Han Sanha's face. Bai Shue? Is it really him? Han Sanha was dumbfounded, asking subconsciously. Is Marshal Han surprised as well? It's really this legendary pinnacle of swordsmanship. Han Qing said warmly, I just don't know how this old man offended this expert, to actually be like this. Swoosh. Chapter 208. Han Sanha finally understood why Han Qing had invited him here. He would never have thought that Han Qing would encounter an assassination attempt and that the assassin was actually Bai Shue. Bai Shue was now his guard in name, who else would Han Qing look for if not him? Han Sanha sucked in a long breath and chuckled humorlessly, so this is why elder he has sought me out. Han Qing's eyes that seemed to be blurry from old age scanned Han Sanha and said evenly, there seems to be one less guard by Marshal Han's side. Bai Shue has indeed been my guard for 3 days, Han Sanha said without hesitation. Han Qing chuckled. Then, what does Marshal Han want to tell me? Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. If I say that this has nothing to do with me, will elder he believe me? Han Qing said, I've often heard that Marshal Han's words carry weight and you never go back on them. This old and useless one shouldn't have doubted you. It would be fine if it was only this old and useless one's life, but the few righteous men around this old and useless one wouldn't want to watch this old and useless one die. This old and useless one doesn't want to chill the hearts of the righteous men, so I'm just asking for Marshal Han to produce something believable. Han Sanha felt a splitting headache. His question of whether he believed him or not was his last struggle. He was betting that elder he would give up on pursuing the matter due to his identity. He knew that the other party would definitely want evidence, but he was still hoping for a fluke. It was a pity that things did not turn out as he wished. It was inevitable that he would pursue the matter. According to Marshal Han, Bai Shue only became your guard 4 days ago? Han Qing asked, may I ask Marshal Han, with Bai Shue's identity and background, why would he be willing to be your guard? The question was straight to the point. With Bai Shue's swordsmanship cultivation base and status, he did not even care about important positions like a nation's protector or the commander of the imperial guards, much less a marshal's guard. Was Han Sanha not being a little too arrogant? Han Sanha chuckled dryly. He only said that he was entrusted by someone to protect me. Han Qing asked, may I ask who entrusted him with this? I don't know. When Han Sanha uttered the word, his eyes were almost closed, his heart filled with bitterness. He knew that he had been tricked unknowingly. You don't even know who sent him, yet Marshal Han is so at ease to keep him by his side. Han Qing chuckled, is Marshal Han's heart big or broad? Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. I know it's hard to believe, but this is the truth. This marshal has no other proof. Han Qing smiled and said, it seems that Marshal Han really has nothing else to say to me. Han Sanha said seriously, my life hasn't been mediocre. The things I've done aren't to the point where I dare not admit to them. I really don't know anything about this. Completely unaware. He chuckled meaningfully and said, does this mean that Marshal Han has no idea where Bai Shue has gone to now? Han Sanha sighed helplessly. No matter how he tried to explain, it would be futile. Based on the current situation, the facts spoke louder than words. This black pot was firmly pinned on his back. Looking at the chilling glare in He's eyes, Han Sanha felt helpless. He stood up to bid farewell and said, this is all I can say. If old he has nothing else, I shall take my leave now. The eyes of the two people behind He Hanqing gleamed sharply as they said indifferently, could it be that Marshal Han's subordinates have done such a rebellious thing, and Marshal Han is only going to give a few words of explanation, and you're thinking of leaving? Han Sanhe sucked in a deep breath, suppressing the rage within him, and said, does old he intend to make me stay here today? He Hanqing smiled faintly. Of course not. Send the guest away. Han Sanhe stood up to bid farewell. He Hanqing did not move, remaining seated as he said darkly, I wonder when Marshal Han will return. The martial world is treacherous and treacherous. Please take care. Han Sanhe's footsteps paused. How could he not hear the heavy threat in the words? He said faintly, thank you for your concern, old he. I will say this solemnly, this has nothing to do with me. He Hanqing did not speak, as if he had not heard anything. A cold smirk hung on the corners of his lips. When Han Sanhe walked out of the residence of He, his expression was dark. This kind of injustice, this kind of inexplicable blame, how could it fall from the sky? It was simply unimaginable and inconceivable. Who was it that was plotting against him? An old scholar who has long since left his position. How dare he threaten me like this? Does he really think he's somebody? Han Sanhe closed his eyes and sighed. He wondered if he should return home in advance. Although He Hanqing had not stepped foot in the imperial court for many years, his influence on Yutong's royalty was still considerable. If he spoke to His Majesty, Han Sanhe would not be killed just like that, but it would be difficult for him to do anything in the future. With such an enemy lurking in the dark, it would be difficult for him to achieve anything in Yutong. There was no point in staying any longer. Han Sanhe heaved a long sigh towards the sky. He had always prided himself on being able to predict the enemy's moves, taking every conceivable possibility into account and planning before taking action. However, ever since he came to Yutong, he realized that everything that had happened was beyond his expectations. Many of the arrangements he had prepared beforehand had all been for naught. It was the first time in Han Sanhe's life that he felt like he had used up all his strength or that he could not exert his strength. He turned back to look at the residence of He subconsciously, thinking that He Hanqing's incident had rendered him speechless. He did not even understand who was plotting against him. Those who were involved in the gambling were already on their way back home. Han Sanhe had no idea what was happening to them. Even if he wanted to discuss it with someone, there was no one to ask. That night, Han Sanhe and the youth dressed in black were still holding onto their fishing rods, sitting by the 1,000-foot lake, fishing quietly. Behind them, the 8 guards stood guard in various positions. The night was dark and quiet. Gugu, are you sure you can catch it? Han Sanhe said in a low voice, I heard that Ling Xiaozue has been here before this and has probably left with his catch. With the Kirin fish's habits, it won't be easy for it to take the bait again within a short period of time. The youth dressed in black, Gugu's tanned face was filled with confidence. There are no absolutes in this world. Ling Xiaozue was able to catch it mostly because of his patience and luck. Of course, it's hard for him to catch it twice. It's true that ordinary people won't be able to catch it again. However, the bait I'm using is a special bait that my master has been researching for 100 years. It's specially made to target this unusual fish. My master had caught more than 10 Kirin fish consecutively in a day at Blackwater Lake. The bait is irresistible to the Kirin fish, it won't fail. That's great. It's a pity that the Kirin fish in Blackwater Lake is hard to catch. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to come all the way here, Gugu said regretfully. Han Sanhe said regretfully as well, the Blackwater Lake is now extinct for the Kirin fish. Gugu said, it's not to the extent of extinction. There's still the king of the Kirin fish in Blackwater Lake. There's still room for reproduction. It's a pity that the level of the king of the Kirin fish can't be caught no matter what. Otherwise, the king of the Kirin fish would be more than 100 times better than the ordinary Kirin fish. Han Sanha said, "Is that so?" Gugu sighed, "Master's secret bait contains the fragrance of the fish's soul. Other than the king of the fish, it's an irresistible temptation to the other Kirin fish. We only need to be patient. No matter what, there'll be a Kirin fish that will take the bait." Han Sanha's expression that had been gloomy for days finally showed a hint of a smile. "That's great. When we get the Kirin fish, we'll return immediately." Fishing at the 1,000-feet lake? Yun Yang's eyes widened as he read the message from the 9 heavens dictum in his hand. Han Sanha was going to the 1,000-feet lake to fish. He had traveled thousands of miles to come here, but now he was fishing every day. How could he have so much leisure time? In spite of this, Yun Yang understood the situation quickly. The main purpose of fishing at the 1,000-feet lake must be the Kirin fish. However, he did not expect that one of Han Sanha's main goals in coming to Yutong would be this as well. Yun Yang stood up and paced around, his brows knitted together. According to what he knew and the Kirin fish's habits that Ling Xiaozue had described the other day, the Kirin fish in the 1,000-feet lake had already been caught by him once. It would be impossible for anyone else to catch it within a short period of time. However, it was impossible that Han Sanha did not know this, yet he still wanted to try. He must have had something else to rely on. It was better to be safe than sorry. If there was really an accident, the aftermath would be long. All in all, Yun Yang did not want Han Sanha to accomplish anything in Yutong. What he wanted to accomplish was what Yun Yang wanted to destroy. Thinking about it, Yun Yang turned into a cloud of smoke and vanished in the blink of an eye. Only the soft sound of the wind could be heard in the sky. In the 1,000-feet lake, a strange fragrance slowly spread in the water. In the depths of the water, there was already a faint flash of rainbow. The Kirin fish had already begun to move. The wind blew. A soft sound that was barely audible came from afar, as if something had entered the water. Han Sanha frowned and said, "Why does it sound like someone has entered the water?" A guard behind him bowed and said, "Marshal has good hearing. Someone has indeed jumped into the water on the other shore. However, the other side is 10 miles away from here. The impact is minimal, Marshal need not worry too much." Han Sanha nodded and continued fishing. The youth dressed in black was even more composed, his lean body shrouded in a loose black robe. He was like a statue, not even the sound of his breathing could be heard. Up until this point, the situation of ordinary fish biting the hook had become less and less frequent. It had been a full hour since the last success and the float had not moved. Han Sanha and the youth dressed in black were fully focused, knowing clearly that the Kirin fish in the water had most likely begun to move. The divine fish moved while the ordinary fish retreated. In other words, the moment the Kirin fish took the bait was only a matter of time. Chapter 209. Han Sanha and Yun Yang waited with bated breath. Yun Yang, who was under the water, had already dived into the deeper waters soundlessly. Like a large fish, he swam leisurely in the deep waters, moving more nimbly than when he was on land. This was not an illusion. Once Yun Yang entered the deep waters, he could feel the difference. He did not feel suffocated or uncomfortable underwater, instead, he felt at ease, safe and joyful. The lake water around him seemed to have become a part of him, there was no longer any gap between them. In the water, he breathed freely, his limbs moved according to his will, and the harmony was indescribable. In fact, Yun Yang felt that he was even more comfortable on the ground right now. Every pore on his body showed a comfortable feeling, as if they had been opened. He could do whatever he wanted with just a thought. As he reached out his hand, he traveled more than 1,000 feet at the bottom of the lake without making a sound. There was not even the slightest movement in the water beside him. It was already a rare miracle, but not only did the fishes around Yunyang not avoid him, they even swam around him to keep him company, but they maintained a certain distance from him. It was a strict suppression of their levels. When he did not exude his aura, all the schools of fish that he met as he swam were silently escorting him, or rather, they were lining up to welcome him. The feeling was marvelous, perhaps, it was an indescribable sense of wonder. Suddenly, a rainbow shadow flashed and a Kirin fish appeared in front of him. It gently swayed its tail as if it was confirming something. Then, with a wave of its tail, it rushed into his arms and swam back and forth in his arms. From time to time, it would rub its face and body against his, full of joy. Yunyang flashed a sincere, gentle smile, his heart growing calmer. Following the flow, he dove down quickly. At this point, many of the rainbow silhouettes had been attracted by the strange fragrance and were about to be unable to resist it. However, when Yunyang arrived, all of them followed him back without exception, swimming towards the deep waters without any hesitation. The 1,000-feet lake is indeed as bottomless as the rumors say. How is this just 1,000 feet? Yunyang dived all the way down, but he still could not see the bottom of the lake even after several thousand feet. After a while, Yunyang was shocked to realize that there was a bottomless abyss under the lake. About 4,000 to 5,000 feet into the abyss, he could see other Qilin fish swimming about. Another 3,000 feet down, there were more and more Kirin fish. They swam back and forth like many rainbows dancing and lingering in the air. There were even a few Kirin fish that swam out and wiggled around Yunyang, as if expressing their closeness. Yunyang chuckled. He had yet to reach the bottom of the abyss, but he could already see a huge hole on the side. Countless Kirin fish were swimming in and out of it. That should be the nest of the Kirin fish. Based on Yunyang's estimation, the number of Qilin fish here was shocking, there were at least 1,000 of them. The largest Qilin fish that he had caught earlier finally appeared. When its gaze met Yunyang's, it became lively and rushed over, rubbing its lips against Yunyang's face with indescribable joy. Yunyang realized that the Qilin fish that he had let go did not appear sickly or weak after spitting out their essence. Instead, they had grown much bigger. Although it had only been a short time, their bodies had grown at least twice as big as before. It seemed that the qi of vitality that he had given them was indeed what the Qilin fish needed. It was even their favorite and most effective supplement. Yunyang wanted to communicate with the Qilin fish at once, but then he realized that even though he was compatible with the water, he was still a human after all. How could the Qilin fish understand his words? Due to the language barrier, Yunyang released his deific consciousness in an attempt to communicate with the Qilin fish. Deific consciousness was an ability that all living beings who cultivated in this world could obtain. It was the same for humans and fishes. With the Qilin fish king's level, it might even possess deific consciousness. Sensing Yunyang's deific consciousness, the Qilin fish king was stunned for a moment. Its tail stopped moving and it lifted its head to look at Yunyang, deep in thought. Then, Yunyang's deific consciousness received a message of. Yunyang could not help but be overjoyed. Could it really be like this? The Qilin fish king had cultivated deific consciousness? Although he was not sure if the Qilin fish king had deific consciousness, this was not the main point at the moment. Yunyang communicated with the deific consciousness once more, the anglers above have ill intentions. The unique fragrance is a bait. Don't go up and try to control yourselves in the future. Don't go up and eat the things that suddenly appear. No matter how many good things there are up there, don't be tempted. Good things that fall from the sky must be accompanied by danger. If you can't resist it, you'll lose your life. After communicating with the fish 7 to 8 times, the Qilin fish king seemed to have understood. It flipped its body in the water angrily, its tail coming out with a splash. Then, the Qilin fish king opened its mouth. Yunyang could feel a strange frequency emanating from it. Then, swoosh, 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 countless Chilean fish gathered from all directions. Even some Chilean fish that were only the length of a thumb and might have just hatched came over, forming a black mass. Yunyang, who was floating in the water, could not help but gape as he watched the mystical scene unfold. The king fish was floating high on a rock, as if it was sitting on a throne. Below it was a crowd of Kirin fish. The biggest ones were at the front, and the rest were lined up according to their size. It was very orderly, and there was not the slightest bit of chaos. At the very back were the newly born fish seedlings. All the Chilean fish were lined up neatly and tidily, lifting their heads to look at the Chilean fish king above. Then, the Chilean fish began to lecture. Yunyang did not know what exactly it said, but he could feel the strange frequency fluctuating continuously. However, he did not understand a single word. Just because he could not understand it did not mean that the fish could not as well. The fishes below swayed their tails uneasily. After another wave of fluctuation, all the Chilean fish dispersed. All the Chilean fish that weighed less than 5 to 6 caddies were chased into the water flow inside the cave while the larger Chilean fish stayed nearby. There were actually 8 Chilean fish that weighed dozens of caddies swimming back and forth at the entrance of the cave, but they never left the direction of the cave. Once other Chilean fish swam there, they would be chased back immediately. Yunyang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The Chilean fish could actually do this? This was no different from humans setting up their armies and waiting for battle. Whether the Chilean fish king had cultivated deific consciousness or not, the fact that the Chilean fish possessed such high intelligence meant that it lived up to its reputation as a heaven and earth species. It was extraordinary indeed. Yunyang had achieved his goal. After this incident, Han Sanha would definitely have no chance. Naturally, Yunyang was about to return. Before Yunyang left, he had informed the Chilean fish king with his deific consciousness, telling it that he wanted to return. The Chilean fish king panicked, appearing in front of Yunyang with a swoosh to block his way. Its tail swayed wildly before it bumped its large head against Yunyang's chest. "You're not letting me go? Or do you have some other idea?" Yunyang pointed at his own nose. The Chilean fish king sent out a vague thought before it nudged Yunyang with its head, pulling him backwards. "You want to bring me somewhere?" Yunyang could vaguely understand what was going on. Turning around, he swam in the direction of the Chilean fish king. The Chilean fish king hopped happily before it came to Yunyang with a swish of its tail, leading him towards the other end. After a while, it would turn back to look. Seeing that Yunyang was still following, it twisted its body happily and led the way again. Yunyang followed the Chilean fish king and had unknowingly swum dozens of miles. His surroundings grew darker. If Yunyang was not in sync with the water now, even moving would be a problem. Along the way, he did not even come across a Chilean fish, much less an ordinary fish. However, the further they walked, the wider the lake became. Yunyang even suspected that the 1,000-feet lake was actually connected to the ocean, judging from the way they were walking. Not only was the water getting wider, but the walls of the cave were also getting weirder and weirder. The kingfish's body was shining brightly, but it couldn't emit any light at all. It was all dark and gray. After a while, a faint light appeared in front of them. Yunyang could not help but feel invigorated. Although Yunyang did not care much about his surroundings, as long as he was human, he would prefer a place with light. No one liked pure darkness. The Chilean fish king increased its speed as well, swimming forward with a swoosh. Finally, after passing through a patch of water plants that looked like ribbons, Yunyang felt a sudden brightness in front of him. When Yunyang came here, he realized that the water level was only above his knees. It did not affect him standing up and walking. However, the Chilean fish king's body was relatively large, so it had to swim with its body flat to maintain its movement in such shallow water. For its current size, it was rather arduous. Yun-yang raised his head and looked into the distance. Right in front of him, there was a black stone platform that was only slightly protruding from the water. There was only a strange rock with a pit in the middle on the stone platform. As for the pit, there was nothing at all. The Qilan Fish King supported itself up with its tail with difficulty. It turned its head and gestured to Yun-yang. Yun-yang was taken aback, but he did not hesitate, wading through the water. When he came to the front of the strange rock and studied it carefully, he realized that the pit was not completely empty. There was a faint layer of mist that was emitting rainbow colors within. It was really just a thin layer. As long as it was a little further away, it would not be visible. Chapter 210. Yun-yang looked at the king fish in confusion, not knowing why it had brought him here. He dared not act recklessly, waiting for the fish king to give him a further hint. The king fish slapped the surface of the water with its tail happily, splashing water everywhere. It then swam over and leaned on Yun-yang's leg, not moving an inch, as if it was resting. Resting? Yun-yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why did you go through so much trouble to bring me here? What exactly do you want? You can't be resting on me like this, can you? Just when Yun-yang was at a loss, he felt an indescribable pressure descend upon him. It felt as if the sky had suddenly collapsed. At the same time, there was an inexplicable sense of palpitation, as if the ground beneath his feet was trembling inexplicably. The surface of the water rippled slightly. The king fish snuggled closer to Yun-yang as if it was comforting him. Don't be afraid, it's all right. Yun-yang did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Fortunately, after a while, he saw a ray of light shoot out from the stone wall above. It was a pure purple light that grew bigger and bigger, like a bubble that kept expanding. Slowly, it grew to the size of a human head and hung above the pit. A series of gurgling sounds resounded from the ground. Then, a colorless gas suddenly emerged from the pit and shot upwards. Coincidentally, the gas hit the purple ball that was suspended in mid-air. With a crisp puff sound, the smoke suddenly surged in all directions like a sharp arrow. After the smoke arrow was refracted, its momentum did not diminish. It struck the walls of the cave, causing the walls in all directions to vibrate. After the smoke arrow was rebounded a second time, it once again formed a new ball of smoke above the pit. However, this ball of smoke was no longer colorless, it had turned into a colorful glow. It flowed and circled faintly, it was slow but it was continuous. Seeing this, the king fish let out a shrill cry as if it was cheering. It nudged Yun-yang's waist with its head, gesturing for him to move forward. You mean for me to collect this? Yun-yang asked, pointing at the colorful ball in shock. At this moment, the ball of colorful smoke had already begun to dissipate. The fish king seemed to be anxious. It rushed over again and again, raised its head, opened its mouth, and took a deep breath. A large cloud of smoke rushed into the king fish's mouth. It turned to look at Yun-yang, its tail slapping the surface of the water impatiently. Quick, do as I say. Yun-yang grinned. After all, he did not know what it was, so he dared not move recklessly. However, looking at the king Qilan fish's relaxed expression, he guessed that the smoke would not be anything bad. Doubtfully, he moved closer, opened his mouth and inhaled. Who knew that when he inhaled, the moment the colorful smoke entered his mouth, Yun-yang felt the mystical qi in his dantian vibrate abruptly. Then, a strange sensation arose, filling his entire body with a warm, indescribably comfortable atmosphere. In the deific consciousness space, Emmy that was wriggling around suddenly quietened down. Its vines that had never stopped waving froze in the air, its leaves curling up as well. In the next moment, it unfurled itself abruptly and began wriggling violently like never before. Ayaya, ayaya, Emmy looked like it was about to die from anxiety. The fish king only inhaled 3 times, which was less than 1/10 of the entire ball's volume. After that, it stopped inhaling and laid down in the water. It even closed its eyes, obviously digesting the power contained in the smoke. 3 mouthfuls was obviously the highest it could withstand. Yun-yang could already feel Emmy's urgency. After a moment of hesitation, he channeled his qi into his dantian and sucked in with all his might. Using his mystical qi as a foundation, Yun-yang's suction was not only stronger than the first time, it was even stronger than the kingfish's absorption. The colorful smoke ball turned into a stream of smoke at once, slowly entering Yun-yang's mouth. Emmy was getting more and more ecstatic, wriggling and twisting its body. Ayaya, ayaya. At the same time, he hurriedly absorbed the colorful smoke into his spiritual sense space and placed it around his plant. The 2 translucent green leaves kept rolling up, unrolling, rolling up again, and unrolling again. The vines waved in the air. With the cooperation of the 3 parties, it only took a moment for the rainbow-colored smoke, which was originally the size of a head, to be completely absorbed. Even the thin layer of smoke that had accumulated in the pit on the stage was gone. Peace returned to the surroundings. Yun-yang could only feel that he was different from before, but he could not pinpoint exactly what was different. He was a little confused. In spite of this, Emmy in the space was in a state of satisfaction that it had never experienced before. It wriggled around endlessly, its soft cries of "Aya" echoing endlessly. After confirming that the 7-colored smoke had been completely collected, Emmy wasted no time, absorbing the 7-colored smoke into its plant at once. Its thin and slender leaves were gradually thickening, the area of the leaves expanding as well. Its color had turned into a dark green that was close to black. It was a sign that the plant was extremely healthy. Other than that, the vines grew thicker as well, their length almost doubled. Yun-yang watched the changes with a dumbstruck expression. He was finally sure that the mysterious colorful smoke was a rare treasure. It seemed that he had encountered a legendary opportunity today. Yun-yang had never seen any heaven and earth treasure that could make Emmy undergo such a rapid and shocking change. Emmy was a species of boundless power that was born from the power of heaven and earth. Ordinary heaven and earth treasures might not even be able to elevate it by a level. However, under this strange smoke, there was such a huge change. Therefore, one could imagine what kind of good stuff this smoke was. In addition, his meridian seemed to have been strengthened inexplicably as well. Yun-yang tried cultivating and realized that the toughness of his meridians was at least 10 times stronger than before, perhaps even more. Most of the energy contained in the colorful smoke had been absorbed and stored by Emmy, yet he could still achieve such a huge improvement. How far had all the energy of the colorful smoke gone? In spite of this, Yun-yang only knew why but not how. He had no idea what was happening in front of him. What kind of smoke was this? How could it contain such a miraculous and vigorous power? Why did such a thing happen? This was definitely not man-made but a miraculous phenomenon that only appeared after some kind of miraculous coincidence by the power of heaven's creation. This was heaven's creation, the mystical wonder of God. It was not something that could be achieved by a human. The king of Qilan fish had already woken up from the absorption of the colorful smoke. It was obvious that it had improved as it dashed around in the shallow water like a horse. Water splashed everywhere. Yun-yang noticed that the rainbow color of the king of Qilan fish seemed to have deepened. It looked like the colorful smoke was extraordinarily useful to the Qilan fish as well. The king of Qilan fish brought Yun-yang all the way here and happily brought him out again. Along the way, its fat tail splashed water everywhere. It was obviously in high spirits and full of pride. Halfway through the journey, Yun-yang laughed and hugged the king of Qilan fish's head, rubbing it affectionately and transferring a gust of air of vitality into the king of Qilan fish. The king Qilan fish was delighted by this gift. When it realized that the air of vitality that Yun-yang had given it this time was actually more than the last time, it began to spin around in the water like it was dancing. With a swoosh, it had gone thousands of feet away. With another swoosh, it had returned, and with another swoosh, it had gone out again. The man and the fish left the unpredictable abyss in their respective states of joy and returned to the 1,000-feet lake. Yunyang was really about to leave now. The king of Qilan fish followed behind him reluctantly for a long time. Go back. Yunyang patted the king of Qilan fish's head and comforted it. I'll come again in the future. We'll meet again. This sentence was not false. How could Yunyang not come when there was such a magical creature here? Even if Yunyang did not come himself, Emmy would pester him to come often. The king of Qilan fish rubbed its huge rainbow fish head against Yunyang's chest like a spoiled child, pestering an adult to not leave. Its infatuation was different from Emmy's, but it touched Yunyang just as much. It only stopped reluctantly after being comforted repeatedly. Watching Yunyang leave from a distance, it lay there and did not move for a long time. Yunyang's fortuitous encounter under the water this time was indeed a great benefit, although he did not realize it himself. However, Han Sanhe and the youth dressed in black who were by the shore looked miserable. The stage of ordinary fish biting the bait had passed, so it should be the Qilan fish's turn. However, for some unknown reason, the ordinary fish species that should not be attacking them had begun to attack in batches. Carps, grass carps, snakeheads, silver carps, and so on and so forth. The youth dressed in black's fish soul incense was specially made for the Qilan fish. If it could attract the king of fishes like the Qilan fish, it was only natural that it would be more enticing to the ordinary fish species. What was worse was that even though there were plenty of fish species attacking them, there were no bigger fish. They were all small fish that weighed about half a catty, biting the bait in a frenzy. There was not much of the priceless fish soul incense, but all of it had been fed to these small fish. In the end, when the bait of the fish soul incense had been used up, there was not even a shadow of the Qilan fish to be seen. This matter was really too strange. It was too **king strange. What exactly was the problem? Chapter 211. Han Sanhe and the youth in black, who knew that they had lost everything and their hopes were dashed, looked at each other speechlessly. Could it be that there are no Qilan fish in this 1,000-feet lake? The youth in black looked indignant as he uttered an answer that he himself did not believe. Han Sanhe frowned without saying a word. He was puzzled as well, but he did not want to fool himself. If there are no Qilan fish in the 1,000-feet lake, why did Ling Xiaozue come here specifically to fish? The youth in black mumbled to himself, according to my master, what Ling Xiaozue needs the most is the Qilan fish. Wherever Ling Xiaozue stops to fish, there will definitely be Qilan fish. There's no doubt about this. Our fish soul fragrance is the most precious medicine in the sect. It's much more advanced than the bait Ling Xiaozue uses and it's specially made to target the Qilan fish. It doesn't make sense that he can fish them but we can't. It doesn't make sense. The youth in black felt like he was about to break down. The effect of the fish soul fragrance was so potent, its rarity was naturally the same. Whether it was the ingredients or the difficulty of its production, it was beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. He had brought so much fish soul fragrance out this time, thinking that he could accomplish something big in one fell swoop and harvest a large number of Qilan fish, allowing his cultivation base to take a leap. Who would have thought that they would all be fed to the small fish? If this were to be brought back to the sect, even if his master doted on him and would not really blame him, he would definitely become a laughingstock in the sect, an eternal joke. Did you know that Master's precious Gugu brought the fish soul fragrance out and caught a bunch of small fish? Ha ha ha. I'm delighted to hear that. Gugu felt like she was going crazy when she thought of the scene. Can we be sure that Ling Xiaozue really caught the Qilan fish in the 1,000-feet lake? Han Sanhe asked softly, could it be that Ling Xiaozue didn't catch any as well? The youth in black fell silent. It was unclear whether Ling Xiaozue had caught the fish or not. After all, no one dared to look for Ling Xiaozue to verify the matter. If Ling Xiaozue didn't catch any, then perhaps this 1,000-feet lake really doesn't have such fish. Han Sanha said. The youth in black lowered his head in silence. Let's go back. Han Sanha sighed. After all, this Qilin fish is a heavenly treasure. If it could be obtained so easily, I'm afraid, it wouldn't be that precious. Han Sanha comforted him, with your peerless potential of 9 innately awakened chakras, you will definitely be an exceptional figure in the Tianxian continent in the future. Perhaps, not taking this shortcut is your good fortune instead. The young man in black sighed and stood up unhappily. This is the only thing we can do now. The two of them didn't even pack up their fishing rods and just left them there. Since they couldn't catch any Kirin fish, what was the point of keeping these fishing rods? He stood up and sighed as he slowly walked back. I've already reported to the school about Bai Xue. The youth in black said, my master has already sent someone out to look for this Bai Xue. We have to demand an explanation from him. Gugu, Bai Xue is no ordinary person. What about the people your master has sent? Could it be? Han Sanha reminded him, you must ensure that everything is safe. Don't let your guard down. The youth dressed in black, Gugu, said, this time, my master has sent eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother had fought with Bai Xue back in the day, so he knows him well. I believe there won't be any accidents. Don't worry, Marshal. The black-clothed youth paused for a moment before saying, Marshal, I'm actually surprised by another matter. Han Sanha was stunned. What is it? The youth in black thought for a moment and said, actually, I have my doubts about old He Hanqing. Han Sanha was stunned again and said in surprise, what does Gugu think? Just come. The youth in black said, Marshal, do you still remember the situation when you first met Bai Xue? Han Sanha was an enlightened man as well. With a quick thought, he could vaguely guess what the youth in black was referring to. Are you saying that He Hanqing's words are not entirely true? Not entirely true, I have my doubts. Marshal, please think about it. The 8 guards that you've assigned to you are all top-notch. Although they aren't among the world's top experts, 4 of them can fight against the world's pinnacle when they join forces. Even if they can't win in the end, they can still put up a fight for a while. However, Bai Xue doesn't care about the 4 of them joining forces. Perhaps Bai Xue can easily break through their teamwork. This is also the main reason why none of us refuted when Bai Xue dared to say that he could kill you, Marshal. Marshal, your defensive formation can be said to be top-notch no matter which country it is in. But how could old He escape Bai Xue's ambush? Based on the righteous man he spoke of? The youth in black said in a low voice. Han Sanha thought about it for a moment and said slowly, He Hanqing has a reputation and is highly respected in Yutang. Perhaps he really has some expert helping him. The youth in black said, if that's the case, then old He is even more remarkable. To be able to assemble a formation to fight against Bai Xue, the capability he possesses is already terrifying. He said that he's targeting us. Our return journey is going to be a tough one. Han Sanha nodded. I understand what you mean. Tiantang City is indeed not a good place to stay. Since we didn't get the Kirin fish this time, let's go back as soon as possible. The youth in black replied, yes. Turning to look at the calm surface of the 1,000-feet lake, a sliver of indignation flitted across his eyes. Early in the morning the next day, Han Sanha sent someone to deliver a letter from him to old Marshal Qiu's residence, informing him of his departure. Qiu Jianhan finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the letter. The plague had finally left. When he wanted to send the letter off, he was told that Han Sanha and his entourage had already left the city gates and were at least dozens of miles away from the city. It's life or death if we meet again, Qiu Jianhan sighed and raised his goblet, toasting from afar. Han Sanhe, have a safe journey. Just as Yun Yang woke up, he saw Lao Mei and Fang Mafei standing outside the door with grim expressions. What is it? Yun Yang asked as he wiped his face with a towel. Something big has happened. Bai Yixue is here. Fang Mafei said. Yun Yang nodded faintly. I'll go take a look. When he saw Bai Yixue, Yun Yang could not help but be shocked. Bai Yixue had come, but he no longer looked like a human. Although he was still standing, he looked extremely disheveled. Only his eyes were glaring at Yun Yang. His white robe that was initially spotless was now ragged, hanging on his body in strips. Blood stains covered him from head to toe, there was a bloody hole on his shoulder and dozens of bloody holes on both sides of his thighs. Had it been someone else, he would have died long ago with such severe injuries. What is going on? Yun Yang asked in shock. Brother Bai, how could this be? It would have been better if Yun Yang had not spoken. Once he did, Bai Yixue's eyes reddened. What is going on? Don't you know what is going on? Yun Yang grinned. I really don't know, Bai Yixue's eyes were almost spitting fire. Don't King play dumb with me. Tell me clearly, what kind of person is that he Han Qing? Yun Yang said in surprise, the Grand Master of Yutong's literati, the leader of a generation of scholars. Before he could finish, Bai Yixue had already interrupted him in exasperation. What bullsh*t literati, what leader of scholars? King set someone up. Bai Yixue growled in an unusually low voice, even when I was fighting the concourse of the underworld, I wasn't as disheveled as I am now. Bai Yixue was truly aggrieved. He had never seen someone set him up like this. After leaving the residence of Bai Yixue realized that he had become everyone's target. No matter where he ran to, there would be assassins waiting for him. No matter who he met, they would attack him. He had been ambushed more than 120 times. How long had it been? What was worse was that there were more than a dozen of those who had fought with him, whose cultivation base was similar to the 8 people in the residence. There was even one whose cultivation base was obviously a notch higher than his who was searching for him. If it were not for Bai Yixue's vigilance, he would have long been dead. Now, however, he had turned from an idler to a street rat, a target that everyone wanted to beat up. Even when he had been hunted by First Court King Qingguang, it had not been as dangerous as it was now. First Court King Qingguang was alone after all. Even when he was being hunted, there would always be time for him to catch his breath. This time, however, it was like a dragnet that was endless, coming one after the other. When he killed a 5th peak, a 7th peak appeared. When he killed a 7th peak, a 9th peak appeared. When he injured and chased the 9th peak away, a few perfected ones appeared. Then, more powerful ones popped up one after another. It seemed that as long as he could continue fighting, the other party would continue to send out stronger and more powerful ones until he was killed. Bai Yixue could no longer hold himself back from the current situation. After the latest intense battle, he had activated the Blood Soul Escape, exhausting his potential to unleash his extreme speed to find Yun Yang. Who knew that a person's fart could hit his heel when he was down on his luck? On his way back, he had actually met First Court King Qingguang, who had disappeared for more than 10 days. After a bout of fighting, he had been severely injured and was on the brink of death. Finally, he had managed to escape with his life. He struggled his way to Yun Yang. I have to get to the bottom of this today. The more Bai Yixue thought about it, the more he felt wronged. He said in grief and indignation, "What kind of tiger's den have you made me barge into? There was no way to play with people like this." Chapter 212. How could Yun Yang admit to the crux of the matter? Yun Yang frowned and said, "Dragon's lair and tiger's den? How could it be?" He Hanqing is the mastermind of the previous family of generals case. His crime is so heinous that everyone has the right to punish him. I've spared no effort to obtain this secret. This person's reputation among the scholars is too high. As long as he wants to cause trouble, he can do it with a mere thought. That's why I've come up with the idea of getting rid of him. It's only to get rid of the traitor for the nation, to get rid of the scourge for the people, to enforce justice for the world. There's no personal grudge. I've even used you because you're currently covered by your identity as Han Sanha's guard. It's enough to confuse the public, but there's no deeper intention. I've always thought that you would succeed easily with your ability and Han Sanha would be the scapegoat. However, from what you've said, this matter, has a huge change occurred? Bai Shue almost spat blood as he said in grief, "Don't you know the true capability of the person you're dealing with?" Yun Yang said seriously, "I only know that this person is extremely dangerous to Yutong and must be eliminated. Otherwise, why would I go through so much trouble to set up layers of schemes and set up a series of traps against him?" Bai Shue was speechless. Yun Yang had already been so frank and told him the entire plan from the beginning to the end. What else could he say? What else could he say? Listening to him, it sounded like this young Master Yun was the true hero who served the nation and the people, but I've been tricked so badly, what can I say? Yun Yang sighed. Let's not talk about anything else first. Let's deal with your injuries first. Bai Shue chuckled bitterly. Are you sure this place can protect me? Yun Yang sighed. So what if it can or not? You know that you shouldn't have come to me. Coming here is equivalent to exposing yourself and putting me in front of everyone, yet you've still come. It's obvious that you're at your wit's end, but you're not willing to die just like that. Don't worry, I won't be unjust even if you're heartless. No matter who you've provoked, or whether it's really related to what I asked you to do, since you're already here, I definitely won't send you away for no reason. The current situation is that you've failed to do what you owe me. At the very least, you haven't finished what you owe me. Naturally, our agreement hasn't been fulfilled. I won't let you die just like that. Bai Shue almost fainted. You obviously don't believe me. I'm not. Oh my God, you want me to kill them? He wanted to refute her, but before he could open his mouth, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. He was already severely injured, so it was not easy for him to hold on until now. Now that he was overwhelmed with anger, he could no longer hold on and fainted. Of course, he was also trying to escape from reality, seizing the opportunity to force Yun Yang. It would be best if he could cancel the mission. Yun Yang did not expect this fellow to be so temperamental. He could not help chuckling and said, "Let this Lord Bai stay in our house first. If King Qingguang finds this place during this period of time, let him look for me directly. I have my reasons." Looking at Bai Shue's fainted face, Yun Yang wore a meaningful smile. This fellow actually wants to act shamelessly in front of me. All the foreign generals had left, including Han Sanha and the others who were the last to leave. Dressed in purple, Yun Yang sat under the flowering tree, deep thought flashing across his face. Based on the current situation, Bai Shue's assassination could only be considered half completed. Yun Yang had never hoped that Bai Shue could actually kill He Hanqing. With He Hanqing's foundation, Bai Shue would not be able to defeat him no matter how strong he was. This was something that was difficult to resolve. Yun Yang's real goal was to incite the conflict between the Four Seasons Tower and Han Sanha. That was all. If these two groups of people were to go against each other, that would be the scene that Yun Yang would be most happy to see. As the operation of the continent's foreign generals in Tiantang City came to an end, Yun Yang naturally shifted his focus back to Supreme Lord Springfrost. The only thing on his mind right now was to kill He Hanqing. As for Bai Shue himself, Yun Yang did not have any specific thoughts. No matter what Bai Shue did in the process, Yun-yang did not want to be bothered about it. However, the situation now was very different from what he had planned. The original plan was for Bai Yixue to carry out the assassination after Han Sanhe had left. No matter what happened to Bai Yixue in the assassination, whether he escaped or died in the battle, Han Sanhe had already left, so he would be the one to take the blame for everything. By then, He Hunching's rage would be much more intense than it was now because he would have lost the first target to vent his anger. Now, however, Han Sanhe had not left and Bai Yixue had made his move. The two parties involved had even met face to face. Even if the explanation did not work, the outcome was still not optimistic. Both of them were shrewd people. It was hard to guarantee that the misunderstanding would not be resolved. Going back on his word and not being reliable, what a bad thing. Yun-yang sighed. Bai Yixue had come looking for him at this juncture. He knew that he would definitely die if he continued to wander about outside now that he was gravely injured. Therefore, he had come here on the pretense of denouncing Yun-yang and asking for the reason, but in reality, he wanted to come here to avoid trouble and recuperate. In Yun-yang's eyes, Bai Yixue's little thoughts were as clear as a blazing fire, he could see them clearly. However, the residence of heavenly clouds was truly the only place that could allow Bai Yixue to escape death today and hide from his past enemies throughout the entire Jade Emperor city. Not only would He Hunching's force not come, even if First Court King Qingguang were to come, there would still be room for negotiation. This was Bai Yixue's additional fortune, a fortune that no one else knew about other than Yun-yang. However, since you're here and I have a handle on you, it won't be so easy when you want to leave. Yun-yang chuckled unscrupulously. He was already calculating whether there was a possibility of completely subduing the world's sixth swordsman. Perhaps after the tour guide, the generals of various nations, and the incident with the family of generals, a certain person's blackness had increased to a whole new level. Now, he was as black as ink, so black that he could not be any darker. It was especially convincing when he spoke irrationally and made irresponsible statements. Young master, about that. Fang Mafei hesitated. What is it? Yun-yang asked. About that. Whitey 2, Whitey 3, Whitey 4. Fang Mafei was rather anxious. I haven't seen them for a few days. Did something happen to them? The true identities of the Whitey were surpassing mystical beasts. Fang Mafei knew this better than anyone else, so he was naturally very concerned about them. Yun-yang smiled. It's fine, it's fine. They just went out to play. It's really fine. They'll be back when they're done. Play? Done? Fang Mafei was dumbfounded. Did they go out to play or work? How could playing be compared to working? Did young master know what he was talking about? If you have the time to think about the whereabouts of the Whitey, why don't you think about yourselves? How has your cultivation base been recently? Yun-yang changed the topic. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were speechless, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by recently? You've only asked about our cultivation base 10 days ago, haven't you? Do you think that there will be an obvious improvement in 10 days, or even a level higher? Send a message to spring, summer, autumn, and winter later. Ask them to come over, Yun-yang ordered. Yes. On the other side, the empire of Zio's generals were advancing swiftly. They were now close to the border between Yutong and Zio. Their journey had been smooth, so the people who had been feeling uneasy all heaved a collective sigh of relief and relaxed. After going over the mountain in front and passing through the dense forest, we'll be in Zio's territory. Even if Yutong has set up something, it'll be hard for them to do anything about it. Marshal Zi Yuanlong pointed forward with his whip. Finally, we're back. The generals looked at the long line of horses behind them and the blood of the hero that had been transported back. They were excited. This military wine has not let down our brother's expectations. Have you managed to contact the spies you've planted in Yutang? Zi Yuanlong's white beard fluttered as he asked in a low voice. We've only managed to contact a portion of them. Many of them haven't responded. Although our stay this time was much shorter than planned, there's still room for improvement. Those who haven't been contacted have most likely been taken out by the Empire of Yutang, said a general. It's not a surprise. As long as there are still people lying in ambush, our plan is considered a success. Zi Yuanlong sighed. Remember to compensate the families of those who have been sacrificed. Yes. A general chuckled and said, however, the Empire of Yutang is just as Marshall had predicted. Our ambush was completely useless. They actually let us in and allowed us to return safely. There was no chance of an ambush. Zi Yuanlong said, Yutang values martial arts, its heroic spirit far surpassing the other nations. They disdain to target the enemy nation's generals under such circumstances. This must be Yutang's insistence. The old marshal's face was tinged with sorrow. That's right. I respect Yutang for doing this, but I can't help but sigh at their stubbornness. Another general said, what a great opportunity this is. If we had taken the chance to strike, there would have been a great chance to deal a heavy blow to the military higher-ups of the other nations at the same time. Zi Yuanlong said faintly, Xiao Yuji, are you disappointed that they didn't attack you and didn't kill you? General Xiao Yuji opened his mouth and laughed awkwardly. Marshal, you must be joking. I was just feeling sentimental for a moment. I'm worrying for nothing, ha ha ha. The surrounding generals guffawed upon hearing his self-deprecation. Amidst the laughter, the group had already entered the dense forest. This was the Empire of Zio's territory, so everyone seemed more relaxed. However, they had only walked for a short while when the sound of wind breaking could be heard amidst the laughter. A white silhouette appeared from the forest like a bolt of lightning, heading straight for Zi Yuanlong. Everything happened so abruptly, and the changes happened right in front of their eyes. Zi Yuanlong had not even realized that something had happened. He was still twisting his body and laughing with the others. The guard in front of him had already noticed the anomaly and cried out as a warning. Be careful. At the same time, the guard leaped up and stood in front of Zi Yuanlong's steed without a care for his life. Poof! The guard's head was immediately smashed into mush. Chapter 213. The guard's cultivation base should not have been so weak, but he was caught off guard and could not even muster his mystical chi in time before he was killed. The white shadow did not stop in the air. It opened its mouth wide and a ball of light shot out. Swoosh! Marshal, be careful. Another two generals leaped forward without hesitation, using all their strength to throw Zi Yuanlong off his horse. With a loud bang, two large holes appeared on the backs of the two generals. Zi Yuanlong, who was under them, let out a muffled groan. The white shadow left a series of afterimages in the air. It came and went like the wind, advancing and retreating like lightning. It attacked the troops like lightning, and as it clawed and scratched, 3 more balls of light shot out. More than 10 generals were killed by this attack, and their heads exploded. Their deaths were so horrible that it was unbearable to look at them. Stop it! Green mystical chi rose rapidly around another of Zi Yuanlong's guards. After the initial panic, he had only reacted now and said, it's a 9th-level mystical beast, the Eclipse Panther. Everyone, be careful. A few guards leaped up at the same time, sword and saber light dancing back and forth, intending to restrict the Eclipse Panther's movement and incredible speed. A group of Zio generals had also channeled their cultivation base, glaring at the Eclipse Panther that was scurrying around in the air, leaving afterimages in its wake. Hundreds of people attacked together. The Empire of Zio's experts had finally caught up from the back. With a long howl, they leaped into the air and swooped down. With a shrill cry, the Eclipse Panther somersaulted in the air and retreated to the treetop of a big tree 500 feet away like a flash of lightning. Obviously, the large-scale, indiscriminate attack was too concentrated. No matter how fast the Eclipse Panther was, it was still caught. Seeing that their attack had succeeded, the group was ready to strike again, to kill the despicable 9th-level mystical beast with all their might and avenge their fallen brothers. The Zio expert who was leading the group leaped into the air, turning into a shadow as he flew towards the treetop. However, the white shadow flashed and was already 1,000 feet away in the blink of an eye, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Meow. The Eclipse Panther was like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. It fled far away, rolling towards the dense forest. A dignified 9th-grade Xian beast actually ran away just like that. When he came, he didn't even say a word before taking action. When he left, he didn't even give any warning. He came and went as he pleased. Only corpses were left on the ground. What's going on? Why was he ambushed? Zi Yuanlong struggled to stand up. His back was a mess of flesh and blood, and even a large patch of white hair was gone. Even though the guards risked their lives to stop the Eclipse Panther and 2 generals risked their lives to save him, the aftermath of the Eclipse Panther's attack still affected him. Although he was not seriously injured, he was still injured. Right now, Zi Yuanlong's eyes were filled with rage. It was not for himself, but for the dozens of comrades who had died in the blink of an eye. It's an Eclipse Panther, a 9th-level mystical beast, Eclipse Panther. The guards surrounded him tightly, and all the experts from the rear also gathered in his direction. It was obvious that they were afraid that the Eclipse Panther would turn around and attack again. Everything that had happened just now had been too sudden, too abrupt. It had only been a matter of time before the ambush ended. After the wave of attack, the Eclipse Panther had already disappeared. Why would there be an Eclipse Panther here? How could there be one? Zi Yuanlong looked at the quiet forest, his heart burning with rage. Then, he looked at the dozen generals and guards who had died miserably on the ground. He felt a sharp pain in his heart that was difficult to suppress. Usually, there wouldn't even be 3rd or 4th level mystical beasts in this place. Why would a top-notch mystical beast, the overlord of the forest, suddenly appear and launch a deadly ambush on us? Zi Yuanlong was furious. Search. Zio's army quickly divided into 10 small teams and began a thorough search into the depths of the forest. Just as the operation began, suddenly, a blood-curdling scream rang out. The bearded general who was in charge of leading the team suddenly froze, his eyes bulging in terror. His hands opened wide and a mouthful of blood spurted from his mouth. The color of the blood was green. As the blood gushed out, the general's body swayed and he collapsed on his back. What's happening now? Zi Yuanlong roared, what's going on? The other generals rushed forward, thinking that the general had been attacked by the Eclipse Panther again, but upon closer inspection, they realized that it was not the case. Everyone was speechless. General Bu seems to have been poisoned. The bearded general on the ground was green all over, his breathing weak. He lay on the ground, only his eyes blinking weakly and in a daze. The rest of his body was unresponsive. How could he have been poisoned? When did he get poisoned? Since when was the Eclipse Panther poisoned? Zi Yuanlong looked at the bearded man, extremely anxious. What poison is he suffering from? Quick, save him. The accompanying pharmacist rushed forward to check on him. It was a pity that before the doctor could give any specific results, another 3 people suddenly let out a blood-curdling shriek and fell to the ground one after another. These 3 people were also green all over, green blood splattering from their bodies. When the blood landed on the ground, it glowed an eerie green. The 3 of them were in the same condition as the bearded General Bu. All of them had been poisoned. The situation was dire. So many things had happened one after another without any warning. Everyone's mind was in a state of disarray. What had gone wrong? When were they poisoned? Also, were they the only ones who were poisoned, or were there more people who were poisoned as well? What poison is it? Zi Yuanlong pushed a general aside and approached the pharmacist to ask, "Have you found out?" The general he had pushed away turned his head unintentionally and suddenly cried out, "Marshal, you," Zi Yuanlong said angrily, "what are you screaming for? Why are you shouting in such a critical moment?" Before he could finish his sentence, Zi Yuanlong's eyes revealed a strange expression. His body swayed violently and he felt dizzy. When he looked down, he saw that his hands and wrists had turned green. "Marshal!" A few generals cried out in alarm and rushed forward to support Zi Yuanlong. However, even Zi Yuanlong's face had turned green. His body swayed and after a few breaths, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of green blood and collapsed on his back. Seeing that their own marshal had also suffered the same fate, the situation became even more chaotic. "Quickly, return to the country." Zi Yuanlong struggled to hold on, stammering. However, everyone saw that his eyes were already filled with a deathly gray color. The group could no longer be bothered to search for the Eclipse Panther. They only left behind a small group of men to escort the wine and advance slowly. As for the doctors and generals who accompanied the army, they immediately left the main group to protect the 5 poisoned people, including Zi Yuanlong, as they sprinted forward. The doctors hurriedly treated the poisoned people as they galloped. They did not seek to treat the poison immediately but tried their best to delay the poison from attacking the hearts of the poisoned people. Everyone was on tenterhooks. Everyone was fearful, wondering if anyone else was poisoned. Who knew if someone else would fall from the horse as they galloped? Fortunately, no one else was poisoned even after they galloped for a long time. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Basically, they could confirm that only these 5 people were poisoned. Although it was fortunate that only 5 people were poisoned, the fact that Marshal Zi Yuanlong was one of them was a cause for concern. The doctors tried their best to save him. Zi Yuanlong, who had consumed 7 to 8 types of pills, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although his face was still pale, his breathing was much smoother. His eyes were filled with anger as he watched the doctors treat him and waited quietly. After a while, one of the doctors stopped what he was doing and looked at the other doctors with an ugly expression. The few of them looked at each other and nodded solemnly. "Marshal, we can confirm the poison you've been poisoned," one of the doctors said in a low voice. "What poison is it?" Zi Yuanlong took a deep breath, his suppressed anger almost bursting out. "It's the soul-sealing needle," the doctor gulped. "The School of Spring and Autumn's exclusive hidden weapon. Although the poison is slightly weaker, it is indeed the poison of the soul-sealing needle. There's no doubt about it." Soul-sealing needle? Zi Yuanlong, who was initially furious, suddenly froze. Even those 2 eyeballs suddenly froze in that instant. When the generals heard the news, they rushed to the side of the carriage. "How is the marshal? Is he all right? The poison of the soul-sealing needle shouldn't have acted up so early." However, the sudden appearance of the Eclipse Panther and the forceful circulation of mystical qi has hastened the poison's outbreak. The doctor's expression was grim. This Eclipse Panther, although it killed a few people, its true purpose seems to be to trigger the poison. Zi Yuanlong's expression was unusually grim as he slowly spat out a few words. "Han Sanha? Why is this so?" After saying this, Zi Yuanlong stared blankly at the empty space before him, as if all the energy in his body had been sucked away. His head tilted and he fainted, never to return to consciousness. "Marshal! Marshal! Han Sanha? What Han Sanha? Is this related to Han Sanha? What poison is it? Why is it so strange?" All the generals asked at once. One of the doctors looked grim. The poison the 5 of them were inflicted with is the poison of the soul-sealing needle. Marshal fainted when he heard the word soul-sealing needle. Soul-sealing needle. The Empire of Zio's assistant Marshal Wang Yutong's gaze froze. The School of Spring and Autumn's exclusive hidden weapon, the soul-sealing needle? Are you sure? This is a serious matter, don't speak carelessly. The doctors spoke in unison, we dare not speak carelessly. The poison the Marshal and the others were inflicted with is indeed the poison of the soul-sealing needle. We can guarantee it with our lives. There's no mistake. Chapter 214. Wang Yutong sucked in a deep breath, his expression turning unprecedentedly pale. The expressions of the other high-ranking generals also became extremely solemn, and extreme anger rose in their hearts. One of the generals said angrily, "If this lowly general remembers correctly, the sinister kid in black who has been following Han Sanha around seems to be from the School of Spring and Autumn." Another general was huffing and puffing as he said angrily, "That's right, that's right. I remember when someone went to gamble that day and we were chatting with our bosses, we heard Han Sanha mention this. He looked so proud then. Humph. How did the School of Spring and Autumn's soul-sealing spike end up with us?" Wang Yutong frowned. "Isn't that obvious?" A general said angrily, "It must be Han Sanha who has ulterior motives and has done this to us." Humph, this is how the so-called god of war came to be, despicable and shameless. Let's return home first. This lowly general shall report this to His Majesty and send troops to Dongxian to seek justice. Yes, we must capture that despicable Han Sanha and avenge the Marshal. The generals cheered, all of them raging with rage. If the Empire of Yutong had been behind this incident, they would not have been this furious, even if they were angry. After all, both sides were enemies and were destined to be irreconcilable enemies. There was always a reason for using despicable tactics against the enemy, whether it was despicable or shameless. However, if the culprit was Han Sanha who was their ally, the nature of the incident was entirely different. This was akin to not dying in the hands of the enemy on the battlefield but dying from an arrow shot from the back by one's own people. Being schemed against by one's own comrade was the most painful taboo of a soldier on the battlefield. This outcome infuriated all the generals and generals. Wang Yutong said loudly, "Don't act rashly for now. What's more urgent now isn't what we should do to Han Sanha. Our priority now is to protect the Marshal and our brothers' lives. Everything else can wait until we return to the capital city. If you have connections, quickly think of a way to get the antidote for the soul-sealing spike. Everyone, check yourselves carefully as well. With Han Sanha's cunning, this might not be his only plan. There might be more to it." Wang Yutong's white beard fluttered in the wind. At least for now, no one is allowed to act rashly. Even if we really want to take revenge, acting rashly will only increase our own casualties. It's futile to mess up our own formation. Since Han Sanha dared to do something like this, he must have planned it in advance. If we act rashly, we'll only fall into a deeper trap. Instead of moving now, it's better to stay put. Perfect planning is the right way to retaliate. Everyone here has been through hundreds of battles and understands this. I believe I don't need to say anything more. Wang Yutong's white beard fluttered. Let's go back first. Hurry back to the capital as fast as you can and treat the poisoned people. Yes. The people from the Empire of Zio sprinted back at top speed. Wang Yutong bit his finger and wrote something in blood on a piece of white silk on the bumpy carriage that looked like it could fall apart at any time. Your Majesty, Marshal Z's poison. The group sprinted like a meteor chasing the moon, traveling day and night. What they did not know was that the 4 physicians were baffled. They had heard that there was no antidote for the soul-sealing spike. Death was certain for those who were poisoned. The poison would erupt within 10 days. Even if it did not attack the heart, it would burn the meridians and corrode the bones, destroying the blood and tendons. Although the marshal and the others were stiff and their flesh was grayish-green, their internal organs were corroded by the poison and they were in a critical condition. There were no signs of imminent death. They could at least stay alive for 10 days to half a month. Could it be that this soul-locking needle only had an undeserved reputation? There was also the Eclipse Panther's cry before it left. Meow. The 4 physicians were not far away then, so they heard it loud and clear. It was the Eclipse Panther. But, meow? What did it mean? It was not only the 4 physicians, there was also the Empire of Zio's leading expert, a perfected Grandmaster expert. It was a must for him to have sharp ears and eyes. He had also heard that cry, but he felt that it was inconceivable. He almost thought that he had heard it wrong. How could the Eclipse Panther meow? This was a little strange. At the same time, the Empire of Dayuan's returning troops had also reached a forest. 3 people had succumbed to the poison and had fallen to the ground. After a moment of panic, the group found out what had happened. The soul-sealing spike. The old marshal of Dayuan's expression was grim. Han Sanhe. Everyone saw that you brought the school of spring and autumn with you. Why did you do this to the alliance? Why did you leave no room for maneuver? Could it be that advocating for the empires to join forces against Yutong was also part of his plan? Yes, yes. Dayuan has suffered the most in this trip to Yutong. Even Sir Liang has perished in the residence of 9 supremes, but Dongxian has suffered the least among all the empires. Everyone has left at the same time, only Han Sanhe has stayed. If it wasn't for this scheme, how could this have happened? The generals were also indescribably sorrowful and indignant, their hearts filled with rage. Just as everyone was in a frenzy, trying to save the poisoned, an Eclipse Panther emerged from the forest and charged into the crowd. It was a massacre. When the guards and experts fought back, the Eclipse Panther's calf-sized body had already drifted to the top of the tree and left like a bolt of lightning, traveling thousands of miles away in the dense forest. Looking at the mess and the dozen men killed by the Eclipse Panther, the Empire of Dayuan's generals could only feel the pain in their hearts, yet they had no tears left to cry. Who would have thought that a 9th-level mystical beast would jump out and attack a place that had been recognized as safe for generations, just as they were about to return home? Go back. Ask for the antidote from Han Sanhe immediately. If he doesn't give it to us, we'd rather start a war. Ask him to kowtow and apologize, or we won't let this go. The Empire of Tianxi could not avoid the disaster as well. The situation was basically the same as Dayuan and Zio. 3 people had been poisoned by the soul-sealing spike as well. Similarly, an Eclipse Panther had appeared and attacked. In spite of this, Tianxi's casualties were the lightest among the 3 empires. It was probably because the Empire of Tianxi's reinforcement troop had been waiting here since a long time ago. Although the Eclipse Panther was a 9th-level mystical beast, it was no match for the army. It had only harassed them slightly before leaving. In spite of this, the Empire of Tianxi's army's rage was like a prairie fire that could not be suppressed. Han Sanhe. Despicable scum, how dare he poison them? It was the same for the 3 empires. Something like this happening in front of everyone's eyes could not be covered up. Rumors about Han Sanhe's conspiracy spread like wildfire. The military was enraged. Although the 3 empires had suffered heavy casualties, most of them had returned safely. In spite of this, the journey back to Dongxian for Han Sanhe and the rest was a turbulent one. Dongxian had sent a total of 5,000 men to Yutong this time. When Zhang Gu and the rest left, they had only taken 1,000 men with them to ensure Han Sanhe's safety. Han Sanhe led the remaining 4,000 men and the expert guards hidden among the troops. Their capabilities were formidable. If it were not for the official army's interception, ordinary forces would not have been able to stop them. However, ever since Han Sanhe's troop had left Tiantang City, they had been traveling day and night, but they had been met with continuous harassment and ambushes since the second night. What was worse was that Han Sanhe had swiftly come to the conclusion that this level of harassment and ambushes was definitely not the work of Yutong's officials. Because the attackers were all people of the pugilistic world. Assassins of all kinds, gangs, forces, groups. Sometimes, there was only one person who would charge in and kill for a while before leaving. Sometimes, they would charge into the army in groups of 3 to 5, charging in and out of the front and back to kill. What was even more outrageous was that there were bandits who had set up roadblocks along the path they had to pass, specifically to stop Han Sanhe's army. The journey back was truly a bloodbath for every inch of land and river. An inch of blood was no more than an inch of land and river. Before the 4,000 men had even traveled halfway, they had already lost more than 3,300 men. There were less than 700 men left from the original 4,000 men. The casualties sent chills down Han Sanhe's spine even though he was a veteran of the battlefield. He vaguely knew that the assassination along the way could not have been arranged by anyone else. It was definitely the old scholar, He Hanqing, who was in Yutong City. However, Han Sanhe could not figure out who the old scholar was, no matter how hard he racked his brains. How could he have such a high influence in the martial world? Other than the old man's own influence, he had even hired top-notch assassins to ambush them. Along the way, the Merciless Tower's men had appeared 3 times while the concourse of the Underworld's men had appeared a few times too. As for the local forces, they were experts among experts as well. The lethality and terror of these ambushers was not something an ordinary army could withstand. Of course, no matter how skilled these people were, they would never be a match for the strict military tactics. The problem was that Han Sanhe had too little manpower at hand. If I had 20,000 men and horses, I'm confident that I can bury all the experts and assassins along the way, no matter what kind of experts and assassins they are. It's a pity, Han Sanhe heaved a long sigh. What he said was true. A martial artist against a soldier could be said to be a sure win. However, 1,000 martial artists against 1,000 soldiers would basically lose. Even if their cultivation base was much higher than the soldiers, there was no exception. Even if it was a 10th perfection grandmaster, if he were to fall into the encirclement of thousands of elite soldiers, with a marshal like Han Sanhe directing them, the grandmaster would only be left with a dead end in the military formation. Along the way, however, none of the ambushers had fought Han Sanhe's army head-on. They would leave immediately after killing a few of them, never lingering on the battle nor delving deeper. Along the way, it was like a pack of wolves fighting a lion. They would take a bite and gain an advantage, then they would leave. Then, there would be a new pack of wolves coming up to bite the lion. Faced with such a situation, even if Han Sanhe was exceedingly capable, he could only sigh helplessly. A pack of wolves fighting a lion, no matter how ferocious the lion was, it would eventually be exhausted. Once it was exhausted, it would be buried in the wolves' mouths. Who is this He Hanqing? How can his forces be so vast? Han Sanhe's face was already ashen. Also, who ordered Bai Yixue to do this? There's a mastermind behind all of this. Chapter 2:15. Yet, there were no signs at all. This old man prides himself on being resourceful, always planning before making a move. This time, I don't even know who my opponent is and I'm already in such a predicament. Han Sanhe felt like he was traversing through a thick fog, not knowing who was in front of him, but the most depressing thing was that he did not know who was behind him. From front to back, there was nothing but a cloud of fog. As for He Hanqing, he had severely underestimated him. He had thought that he was just a scholar, but looking at the situation now, he was obviously an extremely troublesome character. Had he offended the head of the martial world? Wave after wave, it was practically endless. Even the lowest cultivation base among them was at the 5th level. The team of 4,000 people was continuously attacked. They killed wave after wave of enemies, but their side was also constantly losing members. Moreover, the number of members they were losing was getting greater and greater. The youth in black looked grim as he said, "Marshal, I've already sent out a distress signal the day before yesterday. I believe our reinforcements will be here soon, but, this is really strange, especially this He Hanqing's identity, it's of utmost importance. We must find out who this person is." The youth in black's voice was deep. "There aren't many people who can do this in the martial world. We must know who our opponent is so we can deal with him accordingly." Han Sanhe said, "Tell me about the forces in the martial world that can do this. I'll look into it." The youth in black chuckled bitterly. "Marshal, the Tianxian continent is vast, filled with talented people. There are actually quite a number of strong and powerful sects with deep foundations. Although these sects don't usually show themselves and are rare, there are still more than a dozen of them. The strength that these sects possess has already exceeded the limit that a country can fight against, so it's meaningless to list them out one by one. As for existences like He Hanqing who can mobilize so many people to kill, although there aren't many of them, there are still quite a number of people or forces who have this kind of strength. There are at least 40 to 50 of them. In fact, it might even be more than that." Han Sanhe was surprised. There are actually so many hidden forces in this world? How come I didn't know? The black-clothed youth shook his head and said, "Marshal is a soldier after all. You spend most of your time with the army. Of course, you don't know much about these things that are beyond the capabilities of ordinary people. Besides, these forces rarely get involved in the disputes between mortal empires, and they rarely confront the people in the army. It's difficult for them to overlap, so." The muscles on Han Sanhe's face twitched as he said, "If the empire of Yutong's court has always had such a terrifying presence, why, this was also the fundamental reason why he had looked down on He Hanqing before. He Hanqing's performance was terrifying enough, having an expert guard team that could survive a head-on attack from Bai Yixue, who was at the pinnacle of swordsmanship, was enough to prove that he was not a nobody. However, Dongxian and Yutong had been fighting for so many years. Since He Hanqing possessed such terrifying power, why had he never used it? Even when Yutong was on the brink of destruction, He Hanqing did not show himself. Other than being a great scholar, he was also a veteran of 3 dynasties. There were too many times when he should have contributed, but he did not. Not moving usually meant that he could not move, or that he did not have the ability to move. It was because of this reason that Han Sanhe had overthought things. But now that he thought about it carefully, it was extremely frightening. No one would have thought that the main reason why this senior statesman of 3 dynasties, a master of the literary world, and a publicly acknowledged loyal official did not appear was because he did not really provoke him and his life was not in danger. Now that Han Sanhe had provoked him, sure enough, He Hanqing's true side was surging towards He Hanqing in such a terrifying and flamboyant manner. Now that he thought about it, it was no longer just horrifying, but extremely horrifying. "I can't look down on others. I can't believe that I, Han Sanhe, would have such a miscalculation one day." Han Sanhe sighed in melancholy. It was only now that Han Sanhe finally thought of something. If He Hanqing was only an insignificant person without any special background, why would the mastermind go through so much trouble to set him up to go against He Hanqing? Layers upon layers of schemes, even sending Bai Yixue, the world's 6th swordsman, while the target of this scheme was Han Sanhe, he was only the second in line because He Hanqing was the person whom the mastermind truly valued. It was evident that the mastermind was not an ordinary person, he must be an extremely formidable character. Han Sanhe could only blame himself for realizing it too late. If he had seen through this earlier and told He Hanqing everything earlier, the situation would not have ended up like this. Could he blame He Hanqing for hiding it so well? Did he not care about it at first? He could only blame himself for being too careless. Marshall doesn't have to worry too much. Gugu, the youth dressed in black, comforted him. I don't think He Hanqing's actions are to take Marshall's life. It's more like he's testing the waters, trying to force out the third force. However, he doesn't know that we're only a pawn of the third force. Therefore, while the journey will be fraught with danger, our lives might not be in danger. Han Sanhe's brows were knitted together, his gaze deep. He doesn't want to take my life, but he's trying his best to reduce my men. I'm guessing He Hanqing wants to kill until there's no one left on Marshall's side. Only then will Marshall return to Dongxian. Only then will the ambush end. Gugu sighed. Han Sanhe immediately understood why Gugu had sighed. If he wanted to kill until he was the only one left, did that not mean that Gugu would lose his life as well? Right at this moment, a sharp howl suddenly sounded out. Obviously, another wave of assassinations had arrived. Fight! Han Sanhe hollered. Although there were not many of them left, 700 men were still a force to be reckoned with in the hands of an unparalleled marshal. When they were about 1,000 miles away from Dongxuan's capital, there were less than 100 soldiers by Han Sanhe's side. Moreover, all of them were wounded. Their bodies were full of scars and blood. Everyone's nerves were on the verge of collapse. This was truly a journey of death. Fortunately, the reinforcement that the youth in black had been waiting for had finally arrived. To bring a glimmer of hope to this battered troop. In the sky, a giant eagle that was 100 feet wide when it spread its wings circled in the air before slowly descending. Eldest senior brother is here. Gugu, the youth in black, cried out, his voice shrill with excitement. As long as one was human, they would be afraid of death, especially if they were to die without knowing why. How could Gugu not be ecstatic when he saw the arrival of hope? A tall silhouette leaped down from the eagle's back in the sky. The newcomer's robe billowed in the wind, fluttering like a deity from the 9 heavens. Han Sanhe heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. Gugu was exhilarated as well. Han Sanhe and Gugu's joy was not without reason. After the arrival of this person, the attack that He Hanqing had arranged had suddenly disappeared, as if there had never been any attack. Han Sanhe and his entourage had finally returned to the capital safely. However, Han Sanhe, who had just returned to the capital, fell into an even greater predicament. Messenger pigeons from the empires of Dayuan, Tianxi, and Zhou had arrived one after another. The words were harsh, the hatred and the gnashing of teeth were obvious and undisguised. Hand over the antidote. Han Sanhe and Gugu were dumbfounded when they heard this, unable to comprehend the meaning behind it. The soul-sealing spike had been used on them? Us? When did it happen? Gugu, you? I didn't. Gugu's face, which had always been tanned, was flushed red. Then what is going on? Han Sanhe paced back and forth, thinking for a long time before saying faintly, Gugu, are you sure that you've only attacked once in Tiantang City? Yes, I've only attacked once, and with only one soul-sealing spike. I used it on Yunyang. Gugu said with certainty. Yunyang, Han Sanhe chuckled bitterly. It was as if the handsome youth who did not seem to belong to this world had appeared before his eyes once again. He was also the witty and resourceful Tiantang City tour guide who had resorted to every trick in the book. Han Sanhe's gaze met Gugu's. Both of them saw the glimmer of possibility in each other's eyes. If such a situation had really happened, then there's only one possibility. Gugu said hesitantly. Only that person would have the chance. Han Sanhe said, but why would he use one soul-sealing spike on so many people? Gugu said angrily, it must be that bastard who framed me. Framed you? Han Sanhe sighed. If you hadn't used the soul-sealing spike on him, I'm afraid he wouldn't have been able to frame you. Now, even if you knew it was him, you wouldn't be able to explain it to the other countries. There's no evidence. Do you think you've been framed just because you said so? The poison of the soul-sealing spike is rare in this world. There's no antidote at all. So many people have been poisoned by the soul-sealing spike but no one has died. This means that the poison of the soul-sealing spike has been diluted. How diluted? It's because he used the soul-sealing spike to deal with so many people at the same time, that's why such a situation has occurred. Gugu said fiercely, this Yunyang really doesn't have any good intentions. This way, he's stirred up a conflict between Dongxian and the other three empires' military. If I were given the chance, I'd tear him into pieces. Gugu was so angry that the disguise on his face almost fell off. This fellow is really tolerant. He knew that you were the one who attacked him but he didn't show it at all. Instead, he used your method on the other country's generals in the dark. Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. Now that we've all returned to our respective countries, the three empires that are thousands of miles apart, there's no chance for us to sit down and bury the hatchet. This scheme is truly remarkable. It's not that there's no other way. Gugu gritted his teeth and turned to look at his eldest senior brother, begging, eldest senior brother, the eldest senior brother, who was dressed in a green robe and had 3 wisps of beard, smiled faintly. Although we don't have a specific antidote for the soul-sealing spike, we still have a way to suppress it. Besides, they're not deeply poisoned. It's not a problem for us in our sect. Since they've misunderstood and this matter involves our sect's secret weapon, we really have to make a trip. Gugu's eyes shone. Eldest senior brother is the best. The eldest senior brother smiled faintly. However, I can't let my Ying carry an ugly child. If it's a fragrant little beauty, I'm sure my Ying will be very happy. I'm going out with my wife when the sun rises. It's Valentine's Day after all. Although I really don't want to go out. I can't beat the thighs. It'll be later the next day, maybe 8 or 9 at night. I wish my brothers and sisters a happy Valentine's Day. Chapter 2:16. Gugu puffed her cheeks. Eldest senior brother only knows how to bully others. The eldest senior brother laughed, no longer joking. Gugu, come with me. Use my hawk. It'll be faster. As long as we go and Gugu comes personally, this misunderstanding can be cleared away. If that's the case, I'll leave everything to you. Han Sanha sighed. Marshal Han did not know what to do. Too many things had happened recently, they were too unexpected, too outrageous, too unbelievable, and too inconceivable. However, Han Sanha knew that the repercussions of this incident were too severe. If the three empires were to misunderstand because of this, the situation would escalate to an unsalvageable stage. The most urgent matter was to settle this matter thoroughly, to prevent anyone from dying as much as possible. Only then could they sort out the cause and effect of the incident. If someone really died, even if the cause and effect were to be clarified, the blame would still fall on him and the entire empire of Dongxian. There's no time to lose. Let's depart now. The eldest senior brother smiled. Just in case someone really dies over there, that would be bad. The eldest senior brother of the School of Spring and Autumn had obviously thought of the severity of the matter. If it were not so, with his status, he might not have made the long journey to rescue someone. When this is over, Gugu, come back and don't run around. Master will be looking for you during this period of time. I'll make a trip to Tiantang City along the way and meet this person who can make my little junior sister suffer. The eldest senior brother laughed and with a wave of his sleeve, he had already soared into the air with Gugu's slender body. With a hawk's cry, the mystical hawk had already arrived beneath the both of them. With a long howl, the mystical hawk soared into the sky like a black arrow. Watching the huge hawk soar into the sky and turn into a tiny black dot above the clouds, Han Sanhe's expression was solemn. Everything is a mess. From the looks of it, be it the assassination attempt on He Hanqing, the poisoning of the generals, the assassinations along the way, or everything in Tiantang City, it's all a cloud of mystery. There's no clue at all. However, there must be a mastermind behind all of this. He planned everything, manipulated everything, manipulated everything, manipulated everyone and all forces in the palm of his hand. This person is too terrifying. And now, the biggest question is, who is the mastermind behind this? How can he hide so well? It's simply perfect. Han Sanhe thought about it for a long time before his expression darkened. Yun Yang? Could it be him? There's a 99% chance that Yun Yang is the culprit behind the poisoning of the generals. If he's the one behind the other incidents as well, then this person is terrifying. An unusually sharp glint shone in Han Sanhe's eyes as he said in a low voice, "Men. Here. Send a few capable men to Tiantang City. Also, show us the martial arts world's bounty as well." Han Sanhe sucked in a breath and said, "Kill Yun Yang and see what happens next." Yes. Han Sanhe's expression was grim. If there's any reaction after killing Yun Yang, then it must be Yun Yang's doing. If there's no reaction, then Yun Yang's dead. Since there aren't any better targets, let's test the waters first. I, Han Sanhe, have never resorted to such tactics. I've actually made an exception for this child this time. Yun Yang did not let his guard down even though his plan to target the various empires was completed. He began to consolidate the various forces he had on hand. First, he searched through the Nine Heavens Dictum's manpower and arranged for Shui Wuyin to join the Nine Heavens Dictum's work. As for the Towering Wind Pavilion, since Shui Wuyin had gone underground, the Towering Wind Pavilion, which had no one guarding it, had gradually become useless and was sold off by Yun Yang. After this series of events, Yun Yang had an abundance of silver taels on hand. After paying off all his debts, he still had a balance of 210 million taels. This was an unprecedented amount of wealth. Yun Yang was also considering how he should spend this sum of money. After all, in young Master Yun's heart, there was only one concept of money: what was spent was money. What was the use of keeping it? Was it nice to look at? After the four noble young masters were summoned by Yun Yang that day, Yun Yang unexpectedly found out why these four fellows had not made a move during this period of time. It turned out that since these four fellows had received Yun Yang's promise, they had immediately contacted their families and made a scene, swearing to prove that it was true, ordering the four noble families to search for high-level mystical beasts outside. Up to now, the various clans had already made considerable progress in the matter of searching for high-level profound beasts. The spring, summer, and autumn families had indeed gotten their hands on 8th-level pinnacle mystical beast cubs and had already sent their men to deliver them over. Only the Dong family was the most pitiful. Their efforts were in vain and they had gained nothing. Initially, Dong Tianling had received the news that the Yen family had found a hidden high-level mystical beast that was about to give birth and would soon be able to harvest high-level mystical beast cubs. A newborn cub was obviously more malleable than a baby beast. By the time Dong Tianling and the other three fellows had boasted to the skies in anticipation, they were told that their family members had been besieged by a large group of mystical beasts when they were besieging the mystical beast that had given birth. It was unknown whether the Dong family was too lucky or too unlucky. Their target was indeed a high-level mystical beast that was about to give birth, but it was the queen of a beast king. Her ability was already astonishing and she had attracted many mystical beasts of the same level from her own clan. More than a dozen 8th heaven experts from the Dong family who had participated in the hunt had all died in this battle. It was truly a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. Now, Dong Tianling's eyes were red as he looked at the other three. He was the one who had gotten the opportunity first, but in the end, these three bastards had gotten the best of it and he was the one who had gained nothing. Dong Tianling's insides were on fire right now. Smoke was coming out of his orifices and his eyes were burning with jealousy. "Boss, please delay the three of them first." Dong Tianling begged bitterly, "We must wait for my family's cubs to arrive before we train them together and level them up." It was conceivable that Yun Yang could not care less about young Master Dong's pettiness. "Boss, what do you think? When their little mystical beasts arrive, how about I drug them first? I'll make them half dead and drag the time. I believe my family's little mystical beasts will arrive very soon." When Dong Tianling was saying this, he did not notice that Chun Wanfeng and the others had coincidentally approached the spot where they were talking. Then, of course, Dong Tianling was beaten up by the three of them. Yun Yang had no interest in the quarrel between the four of them at all. All of his attention was placed on something else. Just before this, the Nine Heavens dictum had sent news from Dongxian and the other three empires. A few of the returning generals had relapsed. Now, the three empires were negotiating with the empire of Dongxian. Due to the scale of the incident, the empires were unusually chaotic, filled with all sorts of voices. Some said that the oath of blood was vengeful, some said that they should not act rashly, some said that the truth was right before their eyes and it was necessary to send troops to punish them, some said that the incident was too suspicious and they should be careful of falling into a trap. All in all, there were all sorts of opinions. The opinions were so diverse that it was hard to reconcile. What I want is for all of you to be confused. If you don't panic, how can you take advantage of the chaos? Yun Yang's gaze flickered. This incident will plant a knot in the hearts of the empires. It won't be easy to undo it. After all, so many generals are watching. Even if the poison is cured and the people are saved, the knot won't be undone, especially Han Sanhe. He's offended He Han Qing. I'm sure he won't have it easy during this period of time. As for the empires of the continent, I don't think there'll be any big waves in the near future. I don't even know if the ruler of Dongxian will use this opportunity to get rid of Han Sanhe. I'm afraid it's inevitable that he'll be sent to the sidelines. Since the external threat can be mitigated, we can focus on solving the other matters during this period of time. The remnants of the Four Seasons Tower must be found and killed. There's also Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Han Qing. If we can get rid of him during this period of time, it'll be greatly beneficial to the future. We must solve the Four Seasons Tower's problem while the empires are uneasy. Time waits for no man, the opportunity must not be missed. It must be done, it must be done. Shui Wuyin had officially taken over Lao Mei's position as the residence of Yun's butler. Wuyin, what do you think about these matters? Do you have any feasible suggestions? Yun Yang laid out these matters for a while. Ever since he had met Shui Wuyin that day, Yun Yang had admired the meticulous way of thinking. This was the perfect opportunity for him to showcase his talent in scheming. Shui Wuyin pondered for a moment before he grabbed a brush and wrote down the matters. He divided them into 4 pieces of paper and placed them on the table. Then, he frowned and stared at the 4 pieces of paper, not moving for a long time. This was his first task as Yun Yang's butler. The first fire of a newly appointed official had to be lit perfectly. However, it was destined to take a lot of effort to carry out these matters and how they could be done perfectly. After all, none of these matters were simple. Young master, the matters that you've mentioned. I've sorted them out just now. Shui Wuyin's voice was still strangely hoarse, but Yun Yang was already used to it. Let's put Mi Kongquan's matter first. Among all the matters to be done, this is the only one that's relatively easier. Forget about the fact that we can deal with Mi Kongquan as soon as he comes out, even if he were to hide in the palace, it's not a difficult task for young master. Yun Yang nodded. It was indeed not a difficult task for him. Shui Wuyin said, the only thing we have to worry about is Mi Kongquan's ability. If we can't kill him in one go, I'm afraid there'll be endless troubles in the future. Once young master makes a move, your true identity will be exposed. If you fail, the news of Supreme Cloud still alive will spread throughout the world. Chapter 217. Shui Wuyin analyzed calmly. According to young master's description, Mi Kongquan's ability should be above the 8th peak, but not the 9th peak. If he was at the 9th peak, he would have recovered completely and wouldn't have been injured by the 4 young master's attacks. If he was below the 8th peak, he would have been killed in the previous battle. This subordinate guesses that this person's true ability should be hovering between the 8th peak intermediate and ace peak. There shouldn't be too much of a difference. Yunyang nodded. He was listening to Shui Wuyin's analysis attentively, trying to find out the difference between his and Shui Wuyin's way of thinking. As the saying went, a wise man would always make a mistake, a fool would always be right. Only by listening patiently to constructive suggestions and learning from each other's strengths to make up for their shortcomings could the plan be truly comprehensive. Moreover, Shui Wuyin was no fool. Although he was meticulous and could not compare to Yunyang when it came to dealing with the ever-changing situation on the battlefield, his thoughts were much more thorough than Yunyang's. There's one more thing. Mi Kongquan was severely injured by Ling Xiaozue. It's said that he's still recuperating. According to experience, with the recovery speed of an 8th peak ace expert, with the aid of heaven and earth treasures and medicine, even a severe internal injury can be healed within a month. However, Mi Kongquan's injury originated from Ling Xiaozue and was done intentionally. This subordinate thinks that even if Mi Kongquan has recovered a little, it must be very limited. I even suspect that Mi Kongquan might not even be able to completely eliminate Ling Xiaozue's sword energy. Therefore, Mi Kongquan's best state now is only at the 7th peak ace level. It's impossible for him to be higher. If Ling Xiaozue's sword energy still has lingering effects, it can further restrict him. A deliberate attack can cause his injuries to erupt and his combat power to plummet. Based on this, as long as young master strikes at the right time, there's a 90% chance of killing Mi Kongquan while he's unprepared. Shui Wuyin said, with a 90% chance of success, there's no need to worry about this target anymore. It can be done with just the right time and a little patience. Yunyang nodded lightly. Regarding Mi Kongquan, Shui Wuyin's judgment was almost exactly the same as what he had expected. However, Shui Wuyin's analysis was corroborated from various aspects. The conclusion he came to after synthesizing them was much more meticulous. The second target is the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. Han Wufei, that's confirmed. However, this subordinate still feels that it's overkill to specifically target this person. Han Wufei is only a small fish, killing him won't help the bigger picture and might alert the enemy instead. After all, our most important target is He Hanqing, and He Hanqing is untouchable at this stage. It's better to leave it for the last target. As for the third target that young master mentioned, a high-ranking military general. The scope of this point seemed to be a little general. If I want to make a complete confirmation, I'll need young master to give me the authority to come into contact with all the generals in the military who fit this type of physique and temper. Then, I'll be able to find the doubts in them before I can confirm it. Right now, we don't have any specific information to analyze, so it's difficult to identify, so we can only postpone it. The two military targets. According to young master's current direction of suspicion, you've eliminated the eastern troop, which is Tai Zheng's men. However, this subordinate thinks that this side can't be eliminated yet. Shui Wuyin's voice was raspy, but each sentence and word was filled with composure and confidence. Yunyang's gaze flickered. It's not necessarily that there's no traitor within the eastern troop. Tai Zheng was attacked from all sides in the battle that day and was in dire straits. If it wasn't for young master's timely assistance and display your prowess to turn the tide, there might not even be an eastern troop today. The key to victory that day was outside the battlefield. Han Sanhe had led the cavalry to Marshal Iron's back, forming a two-pronged attack. This incident was too bizarre and illogical. Even if the residents of East Defense was the scapegoat, it's still a little far-fetched to say that only the residents of East Defense was involved in this matter. Shui Wuyin looked at Yun Yang and said slowly, however, if there's an additional general who's familiar with the military's arrangements, who leaked the movement of our troops and the defensive loophole, then it's only appropriate and logical. Yun Yang shuddered as he slowly raised his head to look at Shui Wuyin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Also, even if there's a traitor within the eastern troop and we've confirmed who the traitor belongs to and even uprooted him, we can't be sure that there's no more infiltration of the Four Seasons Tower's men in the other three troops, including the Board of War. Shui Wuyin said, therefore, all of these need to be investigated in detail, or even re-examined completely. Yun Yang nodded silently. Besides that, there's another point. Shui Wuyin continued, young master, it's not certain that there aren't any Four Seasons Tower's men lying in ambush in Tiantang City's marketplace or among the civil officials in the imperial court. This needs to be investigated in detail as well. Shui Wuyin said, allow me to remind young master of something. As the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Hanqing's position is highly revered, second only to one and above tens of thousands. Yet, he's rooted in Tiantang City for so many years and has served 3 generations of the monarch. Why? This can completely explain that Tiantang City is the base camp of the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost. It's also where the Hall of Springs headquarters is located. Since Tiantang City is where the Hall of Springs headquarters is located, it's highly possible that at least more than half of the Hall of Springs forces are located within the Empire of Yutang's borders. Tiantang City is of utmost importance. If there are 80 people in the Empire of Yutang's Hall of Spring, then there should be no less than 50 people in Tiantang City. This is the only way to explain why He Hanqing has been operating here for so many years. This also indirectly explains why He Hanqing has no intention of moving even though he's been caught by Ling Xiaozui and could be in danger at any time. That's because he firmly believes that no one can do anything to him here. If this is the case, the source of He Hanqing's confidence must be in Tiantang City. He must be strong enough to be like this. And tyrannical strength is a large number of experts, or a deeply rooted and unbreakable network of relationships. Since He Hanqing is Supreme Lord Springfrost, there must be many experts in the Hall of Spring of the Four Seasons Tower in Tiantang City. At the very least, there must be at least 30 to 40 people. Young Master's target is only a few people, the numbers don't match up at all. Furthermore, if our focus is too narrow, accidents will happen at any time. Our capabilities obviously can't withstand any accidents. Once they happen, we'll be in an unprecedented passive state. Therefore, my final conclusion is that the Hall of Spring of the Four Seasons Tower has at least 30 people. Young Master has said that the eunuch you killed was from the Hall of Autumn. This means that there are a large portion of the Hall of Spring here and also some of the Hall of Autumn's tentacles. Adding both together, the Four Seasons Tower's forces will increase once again. In summary, the battle in Tiantang City will be of utmost importance and will be extremely difficult. Shui Wuyin analyzed the details bit by bit and finally came to this conclusion. Yun Yang nodded slowly with a solemn expression. There are still 2 areas in young Master's previous judgment that are wrong. Shui Wuyin sucked in a breath, looking a little hesitant, but he spoke bravely in the end. Yun Yang mused and said, speak. There are 2 areas that young Master seems to have never paid attention to. Since Shui Wuyin had spoken, he did not hesitate anymore and said, one is women. Up until now, all the Four Seasons Tower people that young Master has encountered have been men, but it doesn't mean that there aren't any women in the Four Seasons Tower. In young Master's choice of targets, you have subconsciously eliminated all women. Young Master has been in the military all year round, all you see are men and your enemies are men too. Therefore, you have subconsciously eliminated women. Although this is understandable, it's still a major flaw. The Four Seasons Tower's influence is so vast. It's easy to imagine that the spies they've planted would never overlook the power of women. Many a time, many places, many environments, and many things can only be entered and done by women. After all, women have some innate advantages that men don't have, Shui Wuyin said, therefore, we have to reorganize and check the information in this area. In our current understanding, men and women must be treated equally. Yunyang sighed and said, yes, I have indeed neglected this point. If it weren't for your reminder, I'm afraid I would still be like this, until I suffer a huge loss. This is my fault, a huge mistake. Yunyang acknowledged it with a pained expression. A hint of admiration flashed in Shui Wuyin's eyes. Recognizing one's mistake immediately and correcting it, this was a quality that surpassed others. What about the second point that I've missed? Yunyang asked humbly, his tone tinged with a hint of seeking guidance. The second point that young master has missed is. Shui Wuyin thought about his words and said, young master's vision is too high. You've always been fixated on the top. You've never looked down. Yunyang frowned and said, look down? What do you mean by that? Including the people in the palace, the crown prince's residence, the generals, Supreme Lord Springfrost, and the Four Seasons Tower's highest authority, Mr. Nian, including the blacksmith, Chu Tianlang and the censor whom young master has already killed, Shui Wuyin said, in the eyes of ordinary people, all of them are existences that have transcended. In other words, these people themselves possess the power to overturn the clouds and rain. It is also because of this that they have caught young master's attention. But on the other hand, young master's attention has never been placed on the commoners. Chapter 218. Shui Wuyin spoke slowly, some of the people at the bottom can do it as well. Since the Four Seasons Tower is an all-encompassing, large-scale organization, it will never let go of the dark side, or rather, places that are not noticed by others. Yunyang's expression tightened as he asked, such as? Such as, the brothel, the casino, the gangsters, the beggars, the escort agencies, the gold banks, even, the lawless areas of Tiantang City. Shui Wuyin sorted out his thoughts slowly, arranging his thoughts bit by bit before describing them. If I were the Four Seasons Tower's ruler, I would never let go of those who were in charge of the red light lawless areas. I must grasp them in my hands. That's because those places can have unexpected effects under certain circumstances. Yunyang pondered and nodded again. Listening to Shui Wuyin's words, he felt that his train of thought had been broadened. Shui Wuyin was right. He had always been looking at the big picture and had not paid special attention to the people and matters of the lower levels. If he had paid attention to the voices of the people during the case of the family of generals, he could have killed it at a much earlier stage, instead of waiting for the matter to brew and ferment. This was indeed a blind spot in his train of thought. Young Master is the Nine Supremes' think tank and possesses extraordinary wisdom, but in reality, all of your attention has always been on the war between the two armies, Shui Wuyin said, so, when you consider things, you usually start from a broad perspective. It's not that young master hasn't thought of the two mistakes I mentioned just now, it's that young master hasn't come into contact with these aspects before this. But in the future, we will have to face these things. Wuyin only hopes that I can help young master fill in the gaps at any time. As I said before, we can't afford any surprises at our current stage. Everything must be under control. Yunyang sighed and said, Wuyin, you don't have to comfort me. If I didn't think of it, I didn't think of it. A mistake is a mistake. I can't deny this and I don't have to. If I gloss over the past, I'll make the same mistake in the future. Just like you said, we can't afford any accidents. In this world, any mistake can lead to eternal damnation. We can't afford to be wrong. So, it's my negligence. Yunyang said slowly, emphasizing each word, I admit it, and I will remember that I will never do it again. He looked at Shui Wuyin and said in a deep voice, Wuyin, it's all thanks to you. Shui Wuyin's eyes flashed with admiration and relief. I'm relieved that young master can think this way. Our first target now is Mi Kongchuan. Take out the exposed targets first. Then we'll look for those that aren't exposed. Shui Wuyin said, although the information we have now is limited, Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Hanqing, must have the name list of all the members of the Four Seasons Towers Hall of Spring. Our actions this time are like taking chestnuts out of the fire. We have to proceed step by step. We can't be hasty, and we can't make any mistakes. Shui Wuyin took a deep breath. Finally done with the analysis, Shui Wuyin could not help but rub his temples. It was too taxing on his brain. All right. Yunyang exhaled, a sharp glint flashing in his eyes. Since we've set our goal, let's not waste any more time. Let's do it. Deal with Mi Kongchuan first. At night. Cirrus House. Yunyang had recently developed a very peculiar habit. Each time he wanted to do something, he would come here to rest. Even though he would not say anything, it was as if he was subconsciously reporting to his brothers, I'm going to kill them. I'm going to avenge us. He could even convince himself that as long as he did so, his brothers would know and they would protect him together. As long as he succeeded, they would be very happy. As long as he found the spy and killed the enemy, perhaps, his brothers would be very happy. Even if he knew that his thoughts were deceiving himself and others, Yunyang was willing to believe and be deceived. Even though he knew that his thoughts were deceiving himself, Yunyang was willing to believe and be deceived. A person who was willing to deceive himself would naturally believe that everything was true, even if it was false. On this day, when Yunyang saw Yun Zuyu, he had a sudden intuition that something was not right, but he could not put his finger on it. Yun Zuyu's gaze when she looked at him seemed to be more affectionate and compassionate than before. Yun Zuyu had always been very nice to him, but now it was obvious that she had gone one step further. Cirrus House had also lost a lot of people. Yunyang was very familiar with the people in Cirrus House. With just a glance, he could confirm that other than a few familiar faces like Qing Shanxue and a few other sworn sisters who were closest to Yun Zuyu, the rest of the people in Cirrus House were no longer around. They had disappeared. Where are they? Why are there so many of them missing? Has something happened to the Cirrus House? Yunyang was naturally puzzled by this. He could show some of his true nature in front of Yun Zuyu. Surprised, he asked directly. Yun Zuyu sat down and explained with a smile, there are too many eyes and mouths, so I've dismissed some of the people. It's much quieter now. Yunyang was taken aback when he heard the question and fell into silence. Yunyang could guess Yun Zuyu's thoughts at once. It was probably because of Zhu Chen that she had sent away everything that she could not be sure of, or rather, those that she had little confidence in. All the potential threats had to be eliminated before they could sprout. Sister, you must have spent a lot of money recently. Especially those who might not be a threat but still had to be dismissed. I'm afraid Sister Yu doesn't feel good about it, Yunyang said. He had called her sister-in-law before. However, after Shui Wuyin's reminder, Yunyang felt that he needed to be more careful with his words and actions. For example, the word sister-in-law. If he were to accidentally call her sister-in-law, it might become a source of danger and eventually lead to disaster. If Yun Zuyu were to die because of this, Yunyang would have to kill himself without needing anyone else. Because of this, he had changed the way he addressed her back to Sister Yu. It's not that serious. Yun Zuyu smiled. We sisters have no other choice in this line of work. As women, Who doesn't wish to have a good man, a stable home, or a life that they yearn for? This time, all the sisters who left, whether they've been removed or not, have each been given 1,000,000 silver taels. I believe that the days ahead will be peaceful and promising. Yun Zuyu heaved a long sigh of relief. I wish them all the best. I wish for each of them to be safe and happy, to leave this place, to live the stable life that they've yearned for, to be completely their own, to be safe and happy. This line of work is always short-lived, how can it last? Yun Zuyu smiled bitterly. The sisters will have to leave sooner or later. I'm just helping them to make up their minds in advance. Yun Yang said quietly, Sister Yu is right. I only hope that they'll be able to be happy in the future. Yun Zuyu looked at Yun Yang with her bright eyes and said with concern, Young brother hasn't had a good rest these days. Why do you look so pale? Yun Yang smiled and said, What's wrong with it? My days are actually more comfortable and carefree than Sister Yu's. Yun Zuyu nodded but could not help looking down. Your brothers are not by your side now. You're alone in the center of this whirlpool. Every moment is a matter of life and death. How can you be more comfortable and carefree than I am? Many of the sisters in Sira's house have left. I wonder if Sister Yu. Yun Yang changed the topic. When will you have your own, the life that you yearn for? Once the words left his mouth, Yun Yang regretted it immediately. He wished he could slap himself a few times. Wasn't this touching a sore spot? Yun Zuyu smiled softly and said, If I were to leave too, when he comes back, won't he have to spend a lot of effort to look for me? As for the life that I yearn for, it's here now. Yun Yang was silent, the sadness in his heart growing. Yun Zuyu smiled faintly and said softly, Actually, a woman's life is very simple. It's all about waiting. It's the same no matter what kind of woman she is. When she's young, she's waiting for her lover, waiting for her home. When she has a home, she's still waiting. Waiting for her man to come home from work, waiting for him to eat, waiting for him to reunite with him, waiting. When she's older, she's waiting for her children and grandchildren. And now, I'm also waiting for my lover. Yun Zuyu said, Sister Yu is always willing to endure this process of waiting. As long as there's one person in a woman's life who's worthy of her waiting like this, isn't it a form of happiness as well? Really? Yun Yang's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said dryly, Yes, yes. It's indeed a form of happiness. I believe Sister Yu's words without a doubt. Yun Zuyu smiled like 100 flowers blooming. Why don't you talk about me? Let's talk about you this time. Young brother Yun, if I'm not wrong, I'm afraid your real identity isn't the son of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, is it? Yun Yang was taken aback upon hearing her words. He was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting Yun Zuyu to be so straightforward and direct. I guessed it. Yun Zuyu's eyebrows arched. Yun Yang sighed softly. Sister Yu is smart indeed. You're right, I'm indeed not Marquis Yun's biological son. Yun Zuyu asked curiously, then is it convenient for you to reveal young brother Yun's real identity and background? Yun Yang's face was steely, expressionless as he said, I don't even know about this myself. Chapter 219. She said, How can we not know? Take your fifth brother and I for example. Even though we were sold when we were young, we still know who our parents are. Even though they are already dead. But, they are still our family, and also where we came from. Yun Yang said, From what I know, fifth brother doesn't know his own identity. Yun Zuyu's eyes shone as she chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. Yes, I misspoke. He knew everything about flame indeed. Yun Yang said quietly, I'm the same as fifth brother. I don't know where we came from or where we came from. A stiff smile hung at the corners of his lips as he said, "It's like we popped out from the weeds." Huh. Yun Zuyu was stunned. Looking at Yun Yang's blank expression, looking at this supreme cloud who had stirred up the world with only one hand and carried the heaven and earth mountain on his shoulders, a sudden wave of heartache that was like a tsunami engulfed his entire being. At this moment, she suddenly had an inexplicable urge to hug Yun Yang in her arms and comfort him. She stood up and walked over softly, squatting in front of Yun Yang and looking up at him. She said softly, "Young brother, you still have sister-in-law. In this world, how unfortunate we are, but how fortunate we are at the same time. It's because we still have each other. After all, we still have kin in this world, we still have each other's comfort. It's all so precious." Yun Yang smiled softly. "Yes, sister Yu. We're all very fortunate." He took in a long breath and said, "I'm leaving. Sister Yu, I'm going to collect some interest tonight." Yun Zuyu said softly, "Be careful. You must come back alive. Only when you're alive can you speak of revenge." Yun Yang nodded. His purple robe fluttered as a lock of his black hair fell, covering half of his face. He turned around and said, "Sister Yu, you're really smart." Yun Zuyu was stunned when she heard him. Yun Yang had already walked out of the door, his voice so soft that it could not be heard came with the wind, "You already know my identity." Yun Zuyu wore a forlorn smile. Yun Yang had already disappeared. Vanishing under the lights. He disappeared into the night. Yun Zuyu walked to the window and saw a white cloud drifting away in the sky. At this moment, it was already past midnight. Mi Kongquan's back was hunched as he coughed softly. His fair and plump face was much thinner now, his wrinkles much deeper. He shut his mouth tightly. It was as if there was a snake circling around his body. The surging Xian Qi also revolved around his body. There seemed to be a small tornado spinning in the room. After a long while, he suddenly opened his mouth and spurted out a green smoke. Then, he violently coughed twice and spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, a strange pop suddenly sounded out from his thigh, and a bloody hole suddenly appeared at the place where the sound came from. Then, a sharp sword chi rushed out from the bloody hole, and with a swish, it slashed a painting on the opposite wall into two. Mi Kongquan's already ragged breathing grew more ragged, his eyes filled with deep resentment. Ling Xiaozui's strike that day had not only severely injured Mi Kongquan, it had also left behind a pure sword chi in his body. The sword chi was too pure, never dissipating. It was also this strange sword chi that had been destroying Mi Kongquan's body for so long. As long as Mi Kongquan cultivated, the sword chi would react immediately, separating into a fine sword chi and breaking out of his body. However, no matter how fine the separated sword chi was, it was still left behind by Ling Xiaozui. It was not something that Mi Kongquan could defend against. Furthermore, it had detonated from the inside out, making it impossible to defend against. After such a long time, Mi Kongquan had only managed to dissolve a third of the sword chi after exhausting his energy and purposely expending it. Based on the speed of dissolving the sword chi, it would probably only take 2 months to completely dispel the sword chi. However, the problem now was that the self-detonating sword chi was more destructive than expected. Even if Mi Kongquan's physical body was still intact, most of its functions would be depleted and he would not be able to use it anymore. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise, or a blessing in disguise. Mi Kongquan had been on the brink of death during the palace's purge previously. No one had taken him seriously, allowing him to escape unscathed. Otherwise, he would have been done for that day. Until now, Mi Kongquan, whose condition had taken a turn for the better, was much more cautious. Ling Xiaozui. Mi Kongquan panted heavily. Although his eyes were filled with resentment, there was more helplessness than anything else. He knew very well that there was no hope of avenging this grudge for the rest of his life. Even if he cultivated for the rest of his life, he would not be able to withstand Ling Xiaozui's casual strike. Two little eunuchs walked in with a respectful attitude, cleaned the room a little, and then left. It was late at night. A ray of moonlight shone in through the window, shining right before Mi Kongquan's eyes. Mi Kongquan looked at the bright moon in the sky, his thoughts drifting. A gaze that was as cold as the moon appeared in his mind. It was the Mi family member who had been captured by young Master Qiu Yunsan the other day. It was the old woman who was old and slightly hunched. Back then, she had looked at him with such a gaze. From the moment he had appeared until he left, whether she had been under the enemy's control or had regained her freedom, her eyes had always been looking at him. Mi Kongquan heaved a deep sigh. That was his wife. He could still remember the time when both of them had just gotten married. They were deeply in love. Every night, he would hold his beloved in his arms, fly to the roof and sit on the roof tiles, looking up at the bright moon in the sky. It was because her name was Leng Yu. Since when did the warmth cease to exist? Yes, when he had joined the Four Seasons Tower and cultivated the ultimate cultivation method, he had become colder and colder to his wife. When he had cultivated to a certain level, he realized that this cultivation method was actually the legendary art of solitude. After cultivating it, his cultivation method improved by leaps and bounds. The progress was more than 10 times that of an ordinary cultivation method. However, once he cultivated this cultivation method, he would no longer be able to have sex. It was also at this time that the tower's order came. He was to enter the palace without any belongings for the greater good. At that time, he was no longer able to have sex. He always felt that he was inferior to his wife. Coincidentally, there was such a mission, he had gone for it without hesitation. He still remembered everything that had happened on the day of their parting, he had always remembered it. His wife's gaze was distant as she watched him leave. It had been drizzling that day. So many years had passed but she had never spoken to him. Even when he had gone back sometimes and met her, she had only looked at him quietly. Just like the cold moon in the sky now, watching him quietly and coldly. Mi Kongquan felt an inexplicable sourness in his heart. How long had it been since he had felt this sourness? It had truly been a long time. He walked slowly to the window and lifted his head to stare at the moonlight in the sky. The moon was still as clear and cold as it had been 50 years ago when both of them had looked at it side by side. It had never changed. However, the beautiful lady from 50 years ago was now. Mi Kongquan stared at the moon in the sky blankly as two sentences surfaced in his mind. Those were the two sentences that Leng Yu had said softly on the rooftop back then, with her arms wrapped around his waist and her starry eyes blurred. The moon is here today and you're here too. How wonderful. When we're old and look at the moon here again. I wonder what it'll be like then. Leng Yu smiled innocently as she finished her sentence and hugged him even tighter. Mi Kongquan could still feel the pair of soft arms hugging him back then. The yearning of the beautiful lady was still so clear. He stared at the moon in a daze and murmured, when we're old and look at the moon here again, I wonder what it'll be like then. For a moment, his heart ached so much that he almost suffocated. The image of the hunched, wrinkled, white-haired old woman with eyes as deep as a pool of stagnant water appeared before his eyes again. Leng Yu, Mi Kongquan could not help but call out. He closed his eyes, feeling like his heart was shattering into pieces. After a while, he murmured, I'm sorry. A voice spoke faintly, sorry? Mi Kongquan, there aren't many people you've let down in this life of yours. Mi Kongquan's heart was still filled with an inexplicable bitterness. For a moment, he felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a strange feeling of guilt that could break one's intestines. Mi Kongquan, who was in a daze, did not care about the person who had come with ill intentions. He said in a daze, Who are you? Are you sent by Leng Yu to punish me? The masked man in black was Yun Yang. He could not help being stunned when he heard the question. Leng Yu? Who was that? Yun Yang's momentary stupor gave both parties a buffer. Mi Kongquan had also recovered from the moment of hesitation and regained his clarity of mind. Exhaling deeply, his aura suddenly turned cold. Who is it? Yun Yang said faintly, has Keeper Mi forgotten about the bet we've made earlier? Realization dawned on Mi Kongquan and he said coldly, so you're from the four noble families. How dare you barge into the inner palace at night? Yun Yang said, it doesn't matter where I'm from. What's important is that I don't repay my debt. Keeper Mi, aren't you going to invite me in for a seat? Mi Kongquan's expression was uncertain. Finally, he said, come in then. He opened the window as he spoke. If the other party was here to kill him, Mi Kongquan would not mind blowing the matter out of proportion. However, the other party was only here to chase him for his debt and he had indeed lost the royal luminary paste that day. If it was possible to keep this matter a secret, it would be best to keep it a secret. If they were to make a fuss, the other party would not be able to gain anything but Mi Kongquan would only be more unlucky. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Mi Kongquan still allowed the person to enter the room despite his reluctance. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.